Shalom, 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 and welcome to Yaw's Prophetic Poetry. I am your host tonight, Jonathan Mish, and we got a really exciting and special episode for you guys tonight. Before I introduce him, I'm going to introduce my illustrious co-host, Vanna White. No, I'm sorry. I mean, Stephen Workington, my lovely, amazing brother-in-law that we get to talk almost daily, and I appreciate this guy so much, man. He's a encouragement and just a brother that can bounce things back and forth. So anyways, shalom, Stephen.
Shalom. Well, thank you for such a good lead. And I was about to be like S, the old what was that show, Wheel of Fortune? Used to watch that all the
Thi-
time as a kid.
this is the
Yeah,
bearded Canadian episode
yeah,
of Wheel of Fortune. No.
yeah. And tonight our guest is also a fellow Canuck, so that's
And
refreshing.
bearded.
And bearded. So I mean, I like it. We've got the three bearded amigos here up north. So
Yeah,
I'm hoping that it's a good live stream, a good interview, a good talk among brothers in the faith, and really excited to get to know David as we kind of dive into his life story and get into chatting more towards the end of that, and just kind of bouncing whatever's current, whatever's popping up in our brain, and we can kind of just sit around fellowship, and hopefully everyone in the live chat has a good time as well and is edified. And I didn't study too much about David's life story arc. I do have some of the key details that I know about, but I kind of wanted to leave it a bit of a. I want to be like one of the audience members, just kind of learning as we go,
I
and
did the
kind of just
opposite. I studied
yeah,
him a lot.
which is good. Usually one of us does the one prepping, the other one does the other, which in
Yeah,
this case mine was non-prepping, so that was easy on my part.
yeah. Well, you're in for a treat then.
Oh, I can't wait.
Anyways, without a further ado, we bring on David Stephen. Shalom,
Hey,
David.
Shalom.
How are you tonight?
I'm doing really well. Thank you guys for having me on.
No, it's
Welcome.
a blessing for us, man. A blessing for us. So,
Well, I'm looking
um,
forward to some good conversation and not
yeah,
just storytelling either. I do that way too often.
yeah.
Yeah.
I figured, you probably have a lot of interviews under your belt by now, and you probably have told your story a lot, but I still want to hear a little bit. So, and I'm sure everybody else wants to on the chat. So, in the live here, but definitely, you have a unique story that I've never heard anybody else, and somebody that's gone through a lot more than I've ever heard really anybody had to bear. So, I'm really listening to your stuff has really changed a lot of how my perspective is on walking out this journey and what God's given us. So, with that being said, you can go ahead and say whatever you want. The floor is yours.
All right. Well, maybe I'll tell a story of how the Almighty will break and He'll remake into something far greater than we would ever conceive of in our own mind of what we could start to become. And I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal in that statement or anything. I'm just saying I've gone through some serious brokenness. But when I look back, what a beautiful process. What a beautiful process the whole of it has been. I'll tell a Coles Note story, I guess, just to give kind of a shell that you guys can work with. Because there's a lot of details. I have people that come up to me and they'll be like, hey, you look really familiar. And I'll have to, rather than just saying, oh, well, you must watch the news, right? I have to actually parse it out as to what venue they're knowing me by, because to many different people, I'm a different person in that sense, right? Like I ran as a public presenter in the health circuit across Western Canada for many years. And so people that are in the natural health industry knew me by that. And then those that were watching the news knew me as this infamous individual that in their minds, based on what the media said, I should be in jail, right? And so, and then there's other venues as well that people would know me by. And so, but those are the two main ones. So really, I mean, I'm going to just rewind this. I mean, I was born in '83 in Fort McMurray, Oil Town. I was the seventh child, which eventually would be 9 children biologically between my parents, and then they adopted another one. And so, come from a large family, and they were devout Mormons. And so that's what I grew up. I mean, I still have, some of my earliest memories are, primary, Sunday school. in the Mormon church, singing, the Mormon songs, including songs like, follow the prophet, as if that's not, ingraining that into one's mind.
Which prophet? Which prophet? I'm assuming Joseph Smith. Would that be Joseph Smith that they're alluding to in that song or referencing?
No, they're referencing. A great question, by the way. No, they're referencing whoever the modern day prophet is, right?
Oh,
Yes.
so they can typecast it to whoever's in leadership at that time.
Exactly.
Oh, I see.
Another question. Another question: is it LDS or is it Mormon for you?
Well, officially,
or was
it's
it
LDS, Latter-day Saints. So it's Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But
yeah, but there's like 5 or 6 different offshoots or like that too, right?
Oh yeah, and that's another rabbit hole, right? Because they don't all believe the same at all. There was some serious breakoffs, and from what I can tell from what you can get from history, there was a hijacking, and that's what became the mainstream Mormon church, which is really far off base of what it actually even was originally. But anyways, yeah, so it would be what you'd call
another episode.
yeah.
We'll go down that path another episode.
Yeah. So the Brighamites that went to Utah that dominated the whole of it, right? They took 50% of the congregation, and then went to Utah, and they became quite prolific. And so, anyways, it was that branch, right? The main one with, I think there's 15 million today. But anyway, so that's what I grew up in, and growing up, it was rough. I grew up in a rough situation, in a sense, if you will. I mean, my parents did the best that they could with what they had, but there was a lot of mental illness. My mother struggled with mental illness. My grandfather, I never met him because he ended up taking his life before I was even born because of the mental illness. I was, there was constant turmoil in my mom's side of the family because of mental illness. And that just passed on to all 9 of us. And it was rough. Like, we thought everybody else in the neighborhood was like extremely boring because they weren't breaking stuff and having all sorts of like tumultuous fun, if you will. But we were, right? We were that household that other kids would come to because it was where it was happening. Right.
With that many kids, it's kind of I grew up in a big home too, right? And so what you're describing is like, oh, that wasn't normal. I grew up in small towns up north as well, and northern BC, like Burns Lake and Prince George, where Jonathan's from, which is not so small anymore. But yeah, a lot of kids, and we had foster kids as well. So there was just chaos all the time. So maybe there was some mental illness mixed in there too, now that I think about it. But maybe all of us have a bit of that from our parents, and we're all kind of hitting 30 and kind of trying to shake that off. But
yeah, exactly. So that's what I grew up in. And, I'll just quickly skim over this because there was recently a docuseries that came out as well. A 6-part docuseries called thebigpicturemovie.com. Anyways, the big picture is what it is, and it really highlights a lot of the stuff surrounding COVID and all that type of stuff, but it integrates our story, my wife and I's story, into there. But
I did watch all that, by the way.
Okay,
I just remembered the name of it now, but yeah, I listened to all 5 episodes of that. But yeah, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, so that covers a lot of it. But 1994 rolls around, and previous to this, we'd been doing really well financially. My dad would take the whole family on a vacation to Mexico for a whole month, and we'd skip school and all that type of stuff. And like that type of stuff was going on because he had a very large, prominent property management business in Alberta, where he had a lot of government contracts, where not just in Fort McMurray, but also Grand Prairie, Lethbridge. And so him and his business partner actually bought a plane and got their pilot's licenses, and they would fly to, do the meetings and stuff like that, rather than driving 10 hours south and then back, that type of thing. So, that's what I was growing up in. But by 1994, things really changed. My mom's bipolar started to get really bad, and she needed a change. So she wanted to move to small town, southern Alberta, Cardston, which is like Mormon Central. But that's where she grew up. That's where she was born. So she really was longing to return to that. And so my father uprooted and basically just sold the business to his partner for like cents on the dollar just to walk away from it. And within months, we went from doing well to doing really poorly financially. Revenue Canada came in, created some major issues, garnished wages, brought it down to the point that my parents were trying to live off $800 a month with 7 children under the roof at that point in time.
Even in '94, that's a challenge. Yeah. So
yeah,
with
like
the
obviously $800 then is a lot more than it is now, but 7 children, right? Like,
yeah,
and
always
so
eating.
yeah, and actually it was a good thing. So Mormons have a real strong motivation to prepare, which is a good thing.
Yes. Yep.
So food preps and stuff like that. And it's a good thing my parents did, because we were living off rice and beans, the rice and beans that my parents had stored up. If we didn't have that buffer, we would have been like going hungry, because we weren't, like, I remember the day that we sold our big van, the big van that our family needed. I remember the day that my mom sold it, because she took us down to the sand store and bought us, like, super cheap clothes that we didn't really have, rather than like wearing a torn sweater. Because when we moved from Fort McMurray, we actually didn't take everything that we should have taken. A lot of stuff was lost in the move. We ended up going down south with one 26-foot U-Haul. And I can tell you today, I'm moving a few times, I require a 26-foot U-Haul. I required a 26-foot U-Haul back in 2011 when I moved, with 2 children in tow. And I still had to make multiple truckloads to get the rest of my stuff over, right? So there was a lot of stuff left, including clothes and winter jackets, and we didn't have that, and we didn't have the money to replace it, unfortunately. So so that was what we were growing up in. And so my mom, during that time, this becomes quite paramount in the whole beginning of the story, is she goes to the doctor to get a diagnosis and a prescription, and to really seek for help for her bipolar disorder. And she ends up on Prozac. And this is January of 1994. Well, 3 weeks later, she ends up taking her life, because the Prozac, and this was the hidden evidence with the whole, this is when we first started learning about pharma corruption. Well, we didn't really learn of the pharma corruption then. We would learn about it later on with our line of work. But what took place is that this medication, this Prozac that was introduced, was actually creating suicides, like at a much more alarming rate than if you were to give people a placebo pill. And the pharmaceutical industry knew it. They knew that the SSRIs in total would increase your risk of suicide by double. But the Prozac in particular, in some instances, was 8 to 12 times higher suicide risk than if you were taking a sugar pill. And so we wouldn't learn about that till a decade later, when that evidence, that science would actually emerge, that they had kept, hidden
wraps, basically. Yeah.
And so now we're like devastated. So I'm 10 years old at the time. Life is a mess. And then, my dad gets married not too long after, to probably the only woman that would have ever stepped into those shoes, right? We're talking broken family.
Yeah.
And she came from a broken family. And that's probably what allowed for her to even like tolerate this situation. But it became pretty rough. Like it was a tough few years, going into my teenage years and stuff like that. But I look back and I'm grateful that this woman, my stepmother, would step into those shoes. But at the time, it was really tough for all of us. And so this is a situation that I grew up in. But I really had I think more so than some of my siblings, when I reflect back, and I don't know why, but I just had a greater level of tenacity, I guess you would, for the word. And so even when I was like 10, 11, 12 years old, I was diving into the Bible, into the Book of Mormon, all that type of stuff, right? Like I just felt really that's what I should be doing. And so I was already learning to put my trust in God at that point in time, in the Most High, right? And so that really began to help shape me. And so at 17 years old, I moved out of the house. I moved out. I actually graduated 6 months early because I couldn't stand school. Like it just rubbed me the wrong way. I did really well in math and sciences, but all the other, everything else was just garbage, right? Like the English and the social studies, something just didn't click. Right. And I think it was a matter of truth. It just wasn't resonating that way. Something seemed off. And so I graduated early, got out and moved out on my own. And anyways, during this time, my dad had established a business that was helping people with mental illness, which was a really beautiful thing because my family was the first to be the benefactors of that and to actually create some sense of peace in the home where we could work cohesively together versus constantly at odds and destroying each other. Right. It was, like I said, it was rough. We were rough. Like we would beat each other up type of stuff. Like it was bad. And so my older brother was actually, he was in a real rough situation, and it corrected him pretty quickly. And so that was a testament and to the fact that nutrition, that which God provides, that which God intended to be in our food in the first place, would restore our mental well-being as well as our physical well-being back to where it should be, right? If only we lived by the biblical principles of how we engage in agriculture, we could have food that would supply us with what we need so that we just feel great, right? But we've obviously deviated from that significantly.
Mhm.
And
yeah,
so,
at least a little bit. Yeah.
well, we have the science on it, and if you take a look at the past 150 years, there's a clear, there's analysis that's taking place in mineral content in the soils and the food and all that type of stuff, and we are literally, as Westerners, we are starving for nutrition, even though we're stuffing our faces with an overabundance of food that our ancestors could have only dreamed of having.
Yep.
Right. So,
yeah, well, we have health food stores on every corner and gyms on every corner, and everyone's like dying, health problems.
yeah, and the gyms are largely serving as an antidepressant, right? Like that's actually what a lot of that's what's driving the gym business for the most part, is the fact that it's an antidepressant.
Yes.
Right?
Makes
Like
sense.
we wouldn't have, well, first of all, we wouldn't have the gyms if we lived more traditionally because we wouldn't need them. We just work, right? We'd actually
Well,
work
we'd be out in the sun all day. We'd be like,
See?
for me, I don't wear a hat, I don't wear sunscreen, and I just go out, try to go every single day. As soon as the sun starts coming out, March, April, I go outside and try to get the peak of the day, all the UV rays, all the sunshine. And as it gets into summer, it's like 35, 40 degrees, and I'll be outside without a hat on. And people will be like, "Are you crazy? You're gonna die." And I'm like, "No, like your body gets used to it." But if you're inside for April, May, June, then go outside in July, August, you're just going to get cooked, right? Your body is too much of a culture shock, right? But I find I need the vitamin D from the sun. Like all winter long, I'm just waiting for that sun to come back. Like my skin suffers, everything suffers till the sun comes back. So
absolutely. And working in the mental health field for the past 20 years now, I mean, it is absolutely crucial. We see people cycle, at that October, November. They go, bipolar people typically cycle during that time, and they'll go into recycle mode again, come up, February, March. We'll do a major bipolar cycle, and it's very common. And one of the large reasons for it is exactly that, the vitamin D issue. Because when we actually take a look at the production, I wasn't meaning to go sciencey on the story portion.
It's all good.
Right? Vitamin D is one of the 7 direct nutrients necessary for the production of both serotonin and dopamine. If you don't have vitamin D, that whole process is broken down. And that's why people that live in the further northern areas are much more prone to depression, because they're lacking that vitamin D, which is absolutely necessary in converting tryptophan into 5-HTP or 5-hydroxytryptophan, or tyrosine into L-DOPA, which then converts into dopamine, shortly after that. So it's absolutely important. It's not important. It is crucial. Without vitamin D, life will cease to exist. It's only a matter of time. You will end up with disease, and there'll be a major breakdown. And I'm only covering 2 biochemical pathways. Vitamin D has a role in every system of the body for functionality.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're saying, unless we have the sun, we will die.
Yeah, kind of like that.
Yeah, just like what the Bible says. It's kind of funny how that lines up.
Plant life would agree with you too.
Yeah.
So my father establishes this business. It makes a discovery, and this was really a beautiful story because he had exhausted everything that was available through the pharmaceutical industry, through the medical system. He had exhausted it because my older sister was married at the time, still is married actually. At the time, 3-year-old son, and she was psychotic, literally. She was in and out of the psych wards on a regular basis, and when she wasn't in the psych ward, she had to be on 24-hour supervision because she would actually at times obsess about killing herself and her 3-year-old son. So completely out of touch with reality. and she's on a cocktail of 5 medications, and it's not working for her. And then there's my older brother who's on a large dose of lithium, and he hates the way it makes him feel. He's extremely volatile, super violent, constantly in trouble at school, constantly in fights, paranoid, stockpiling weapons, that type of thing. And basically the next schoolyard shooting waiting to happen, right? And so my father, after exhausting everything that was available to him, he finally just broke down in the middle of 1995 and just said to himself, if there is an answer out there, our creator knows what the answer is, and he wouldn't want us to suffer this way. And he's using the terminology of God, which obviously now I've deviated from, right? And, referring to him in a more reverent manner of Yah, or
instead of just a generic title, which I found. I kind of explained that to my kids, and like, well, why don't you call him God? Generally, sometimes we do in generalities, but I was like, well, that'd be like calling the doctor, and like you say, what's your name? And you say, doctor, right? He's not doctor, he's Dr. Smith or Dr. Gerald or whatever, right? So we want to say him by his name, right? And just if we know his name, let's use it, be respectful, right? So I always found that interesting. As soon as I found out, wait, God has a name, why aren't we saying it? Right. And his name's actually been removed like almost 7,000 times from the Bible. So I was like, his name's not even in his own book. It's awfully strange.
It is. I mean, this is the current one I'm reading from right here. And you're going to see the Hebrew on one side, and you're going to see, the English on the other. And so now I've realized, after cross-referencing the Hebrew with the English, that every time it says the Lord in capitals, it actually means, well, if you want to pronounce it as Yahweh or Yahuwah, however you pronounce it, but it is
we're not a stickler on the pronunciation. We do Yehovah, but it doesn't matter. Yahweh, whatever.
My son actually, he likes saying Yod He Vav He. He's like, it sounds like a chef's name. Because he's all about the cooking of the meat, Dad, and he sounds like a chef. And I was like, all right. I mean, your 7-year-old brain wants to, as long as you understand, like, let's not make fun of that, right? But
that's right.
My kids are sometimes they surprise me at how much they can soak up and understand. And then other times they shock me at how depraved they can be, because they're still little children, and they act out at times. I'm like, but you know better. Then I catch myself teaching myself through teaching them, like, but I know better. That why do I mess up, right? So trying to learn that little grain of salt patience with my children. And so now that I'm a father, I understand all the father references in the scripture a lot better. And I'm constantly teaching myself by teaching them the scriptures. So that's one of the coolest part about being a father, I found out to be.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing how life experience will get us to see scriptures in a much, or through a much clearer lens, if you will. Yeah.
Keep going.
My father, he's breaking down over this. He's watching his family deteriorate. He's lost his wife of 22 years to suicide. He lost his father-in-law, years before that, in the late 70s, to suicide as well. And he was watching his children go down the same path. So he just broke down and said, surely there's a known answer out there, even though it's not known amongst, mankind at that time. And it wasn't, right? Like there was different factions trying different things, but there was no solid answers for mental illness back then. And my father just spent a lot of time in fasting and prayer, just pleading. And he did this literally off and on for months. Like, he was super dedicated. And I look back at that and I say, wow, like, what a beautiful example. Like, what have I given up? I don't know. Like, you just find yourself, at some point in time throwing in the towel. I fasted for a few days, and I did that, 3 days every week type of thing for a month, and I still haven't got an answer. And where are you? And whatever. Well, this is mid 1995. Well, by November of 1995, he's now, he's a property manager over 26 large buildings. Interestingly, actually, the Mormon churches in Southern Alberta, he got the contract for that. And so he's a property manager over all of those buildings. And so he's heading up everything that takes place, right down to the janitorial services and stuff like that. He's managing all of that. Obviously not micromanaging it. He's the top of it, but he's managing the whole team. And so he's in a Mormon church one day, walking down the hallway with one of his colleagues, and they're talking about replacing the carpets. And he just felt impressed that he needed to tell the colleague about what was going on. Like, he just gets a strong impression. And it's completely out of his scope of business. And but he does. He just does it. He goes with it, and he
Mhm.
breaks down. Just says, like, this is what my family's going through. If things don't change, I'm going to have to send my son Joseph off to the psychiatric institution. I have to admit him there because everybody's fearing for their lives at home. He's extremely violent, all this type of stuff. And his business partner had something really interesting to say. His colleague, he said, I've got a large family like yours. Once again, another devout Mormon, and so big families is something that seems to be a theme. And so he's like, but they're all fine, they're well. I've never dealt with mental illness personally, but he says I spent over 20 years in the animal feed industry, formulating feed for hogs across Western Canada and the Western United States, and we saw something called ear and tail biting syndrome in the hog pens, where the hogs would get extremely irritable with each other and they bite chunks of their ears and tails off each other. And if you didn't pen them away from each other, they'd actually kill each other. So we're talking like, if this was a human, you'd diagnose him with like hyper irritability and homicidal tendencies, whatever. Like they would receive definitely some significant mental health diagnoses.
They definitely throw the dart at the letterboard and be like, you got AMPD, or you got, you know what I mean? If they don't have one, they'll come up with something, right? So,
exactly.
Which I found over the years to keep making more.
Unfortunately, there isn't real big business for the pharmaceutical industry to get involved in agriculture by administering medications for it. It turns out that healthy livestock is much more profitable than unhealthy livestock. And so you start giving them, psychiatric medications, you're going to cause birth defects. There's going to be a lower tendency to even have birth. You're going to have, less, like a healthy sow will actually, put out like a dozen at one type of thing or whatever, like something like that. Whereas when they're not nutrited, they'll put out a lot less. And so it's extremely profitable for farmers to actually nutrate their animals because they actually see the direct benefit of it. And so they discovered that you could completely eradicate that condition of ear and tail biting syndrome simply by putting the proper nutrition into their feed. And it would completely eradicate it. And so David Hardy, my dad's colleague at the time, says, this is what we saw. And at that moment, my dad already tried a bunch of other stuff. Like there was a bunch of stuff that came to the house, and my dad knew it. He knew it was the answer. He had this spiritual confirmation, and they went down to a health food store. They grabbed a bunch of different products. They put Joseph onto them, and it didn't work. So then they went and tried more, and they tried more. And it wouldn't be till January of 1996, 3 months later, that they actually came across a cocktail of different vitamins and minerals that did work, that they had to order out of the States. And that was the beginning of what would eventually become a business. Not that there was any intention of it becoming a business, but it began to spread like wildfire. Well, let's fast forward now to October of the year 2000. Health Canada hears about us after the first study was published, and it came out of the University of Calgary showing that this proper supplementation was over 3 times more effective than your standard antidepressants. And so Health Canada literally comes in the next day after this went on to national news, and they came in and tried to shut everything down, and they shut down all the studies, but then they tried to shut my father down from trying to prevent him from, supplying this to any Canadians. And my father, I mean, it wasn't a business model that he was looking at. It was a mission. It was a mission to bless other families, because at this point in time, our family had just received a major restoration over the previous 4 years. We'd gone from a completely dysfunctional, broken family to now a functional family that could actually sit down for Sunday dinners and enjoy each other's company without having major blowouts, right?
Yeah.
We were now functioning properly, like, going and doing what we wanted to do, pursuing, whatever career it was, or going to school, whatever. Although we were never, as our family as a whole, we just have this aversion to formal education. And I'm not sure if my dad ingrained that in us or what, but we just don't like formal education. So most of us were going and pursuing the careers that we wanted to do, and we were thriving in them. And so Health Canada comes in and tries to shut us down, and that would become a 10-year battle. And so now personally, now I'm married by the year 2004. We're now going through the court proceedings with Health Canada at this point in time. They'd shut down the border, gun-drawn raid on our head office, all this type of stuff. We beat them in the courts. And by 2007, we have our first son. And we name him Ezra, right? We wanted a good, strong, Hebrew name, right? And at this point in time, we're not even delineating between Hebrew and Greek either, right? We just say Bible name, right? because
Mhm.
I didn't know the difference then, right? So I could have, I could have picked something out of the New Testament and I would have got a Greek name, a Greek version of a Hebrew name, right? But anyways, so fortunately we got, a good Hebrew name for him. And then come around 2010, we have our second son, and we just felt impressed to call him Ezekiel, and so we did. And we weren't going for an E theme at that point in time, but then this is really where my personal story begins. Now, at this point in time, I'm teaching scouts, I'm teaching young men's, that type of thing in the Mormon church. And then we fast forward a little further, and I kept on ending up in these primary positions where I'm teaching, like these 7 and 8 year olds, 9, 10 year olds, whatever. And I'm actually enjoying it, right? These are minds that are open, and I'm getting these lessons, and I'm starting to find myself looking at these lessons. I'm saying there's something more. There's something more. And so I started to push the envelope a little bit, right? I'm starting to kind of break out of the bounds of typical Mormon dogma, if you will, right?
Mhm.
And and so I'm starting to go through a bit of a journey myself where I just feel like there's something more, but I'm extremely devoted. If you would have challenged me on Mormonism, I would have come back with all sorts of dogmatic answers at this point, and we would have had ourselves, a big clash, and I would have ended up looking like the fool, because it just wouldn't have been biblically sound what I was spewing, but I sure would have done so devotedly, right?
Mm.
Cognitive
So
dissonance is a real thing. So
it is
I
actually, and I have to
suffered it
say this.
for years. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually, I started reading a set of books. Let me just, sorry, my light just shut off here. I started reading a set of books called the Uncle Eric series, and it's like dumbed down. Like people that don't understand economics can actually learn in-depth economics, but at like a grade 5 level type of thing. Like anybody can understand it, and he has this beautiful way of breaking things down. But his first book in the series actually it doesn't just touch. I think there's a few chapters on cognitive dissonance, and I read that in about 2006, 2007. And I began to become much more self-reflective at that point, and that was actually part of the journey, was starting to understand because when I got done reading it, I realized, wait a minute, this is the root of pride, but
Mhm.
you're blinded to it. Pride is like the most insidious of parasites, because the best parasites will never let their host know that they're even there.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's the way pride is. And I discovered that. And so I started to check myself based on the behavior that I would exhibit in particular circumstances and say, wait a minute, does that check the boxes of cognitive dissonance? If so, why am I doing this?
Mhm.
Right? It
Mhm.
became quite an interesting journey, to the point where now I could just reflect back and think, man, I'm acting like an idiot. I'm completely blinded to this, and I'm acting like I'm not blind to it. What's up with this, right? What am I protecting? Right.
Mhm.
And so that was a part of it. That was a big part of the journey. But it takes time to root that out. And so, fast forward 6 years, 5 years from the time that I learned about cognitive dissonance, I still would have exhibited it to
Mhm.
a fair degree. And so it was a slow journey. And what ended up happening is in 2012 we moved. Had a beautiful experience. We felt impressed to move. I felt it first, and then my wife felt it a little bit later. I just merely planted the seed and walked away because I had no logic as to why we need to move. We had just finished or we were just finishing a 5-year reno project on our house. We
Mhm.
had a 5 to 10 year plan to stay in there and to actually enjoy the fruits of our labors. And literally, I'm just finishing it up and finally getting a functional living room downstairs where we can finally, watch some movies and TV again, because we hadn't been able to do that for 5 years, which was a beautiful blessing to pack the TV up into the closet.
Mhm.
And so we're looking at this, and also I get this very strong impression: it's time to sell the house, and I've got no logical basis to it. And so I remember walking up the stairs, right? Because I was just looking at the I was admiring my craftsmanship, because I've never engaged in that, and I had this beautiful rock work behind the wood stove and all this. And so I walk upstairs, and my wife is doing some touch ups in the kitchen, and I just said, "Hey, I just got this impression it's time to sell the house." And she's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I'm not going to fight with her about it, because I got no ammunition. I got nothing to it other than I had an impression. That's all I can say. Right. so I walked away, and I just said, at that point in time where my mind is, I said, God, if this is truly of you, you got to make it happen, because I can't. Right. Like, it's, what am I going to say? Right. Like, we need to move because I like, I don't know. Like, I got nothing. So she eventually felt it a few months later on her own accord, knew that it was time to move. We still didn't really know why. So we move. And so in late 2011, we move, and we end up actually in the place that we're here right now. After a long roundabout journey, we've moved all over the place and back here again. But that's when all of a sudden our lives just got flipped upside down, like completely upside down. Because 3 months after we moved, my son came down, my second son, Ezekiel, he's now a year and a half. He comes down with the croup. And it lasts typically like a week, and it did. And then it went away, and we went back to church that following weekend. And then the day after that is parent preschool, or my wife would take my kids to parent preschool. We had no intention of utilizing the educational system, other than this is parent preschool, you get to meet with other parents. They had really good resources. This particular not course, but program that they had with some very free thinking individuals that were running it. And so it was really a beautiful resource for the parents, and just an opportunity for the kids to go and play together, right? And so he goes to that again, and not as much energy as normal, but he's playing. And then I go on a business trip, because at this point in time I'm going and doing small presentations all across the countryside at health food stores. And anyways, I get a phone call from my wife, and she thinks that he's getting sick again. And so I come home. Well, I was coming home anyways. So I get home by afternoon Thursday, and I went and looked at my son, and he was watching a cartoon on the bed. And just the way he's posturing himself, it looked like he was like, coming down with the flu. He just looked uncomfortable, but like, that's it. Like, you know how you get achy and that type of stuff. You're just uncomfortable in your skin. Anyway, so that started to turn. It started to go away, Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday it started to turn back again. No, Sunday night started to turn back again. And then Monday, we went and fought this. We found out, sorry, there's a lot of elements to the story, and I'm skimming over, and I'm missing a lot of stuff. But we discovered that was on the books in the county, the Emergency Management Act, which was basically the Martial Law Act, very similar to what they implemented in the States in 2012 under Obama. And what it was is that in the state of an emergency, all rights are suspended other than your right to life. That's it. But every other right is suspended. They can take your property, they can conscript you, they can send you to a labor camp, they can do what, like, it is a wide open book. They control everything. They can take your house because it's a perfect area for a staging ground for this or whatever, and you get no compensation at the end, or nothing. Like, it is just, but the most egregious part is the fact that you have no right to do anything other than what they tell you, basically, right? And so we found out about this. So we had me and my brothers set up basically very short of a revolution, if you will. 300 angry people show up on a weekday when most people are supposed to be working. 300 angry people show up, make the time to show up to the county council office, where they had to then take and move us into the mechanic shop, because that was the only area that would house all of us, standing room only. And my brother and I put on a presentation as to what this would look like and why this is not in the best interest of us civilians, if you will. And anyways, we end up winning, and it went on the news or whatever, and because the county actually threw it out, only to bring it back up again in middle of July when everybody's on summer vacation, and they slip it back in again based on what the province was ramming down their throats. Classic. So anyways, that's in the morning. That's Monday morning. I come back, and my wife is like feeling distraught at this point. She's 4.5 months pregnant. She's hormonal, and she lacked sleep from the night before because Ezekiel, I was sleeping in the spare bedroom that night just to ensure I got a good sleep, because I had a presentation to do the next morning, right? And so I'm up early in the morning, and I'm rehearsing what I'm going to discuss, whatever. And so I come back, and she's just saying, like, do we take him to the doctor? And I'm looking, I don't see any reason to do so. She says, well, I have to have my midwife come over anyways this week, so I'll have her come over and right now, like today, if she can, and just check him as well as check me out. And at this point in time, that midwife is also a practicing nurse of 9 years in the emergency room. So she's like the perfect individual to come and assess. And so she comes and assesses, listens to my son's breathing, checks him for like any signs of infection. There's nothing there, no issues with breathing, nothing like that. And so she's a little bit baffled as to what's going on. And then she says something that would set a lot of things in motion, that would create a crisis that we would have to find ourselves overcoming and able to overcome through, glory be to the Most High. Like, I'm not kidding you. Like miracle after miracle in deliverance, but we also went through some really rough times as well. And so she says, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was an individual that came in with meningitis, and you might want to check that out. And so my wife looked at it. Like here it looks like he has the early onset symptoms of the flu, and the symptoms of the flu are very similar to that of viral meningitis. Whereas bacterial meningitis moves very, very quickly and comes with some extreme symptoms, because what happens is you get inflammation of the meninges to the point that it can actually begin to compress the brainstem. Now you can imagine, like that is like the worst headache you've ever had, times it by how much, right? Like you're starting to actually compress the brainstem, and that's what will actually cause the shutdown of various systems in the body, including the heart and as well as breathing. And so she mentions this, and so we're looking into it. And we're like, okay, well, I'm still more concerned than I was before, because there's nothing of alarm. Like, he's not crying out in pain. Yeah, he's showing more discomfort that's causing him to not sleep at night. But okay. So what she did recommend as well, the midwife, is put him on an electrolyte drink. So we did that. We started that evening. And the next morning, he's actually doing like quite a bit better. And so anyways, by that night though, actually it goes to the point that midday he becomes symptom free. That any of those symptoms that looked like he was starting to get sick, like the posturing the mouth, kind of like, for easier respiration, opening it that way, that went away. Any like looking like uncomfortable in the skin, achiness, that it was gone. And so I put him down for a nap, and my wife goes to a church function that she wasn't planning on going to, but based on the progress that he had made, she goes to this church function. And then my son wakes up from a nap, and well, more than that. I mean, he went to sleep at like 6 o'clock or something like that, or 5 o'clock, somewhere around there. Anyways, he wakes up at like 7:30 or 8, and he's got this like interesting breathing pattern. And I'm like, okay, well, it's nothing like the croup was, and he seems fine. He seems relaxed, like and it wouldn't be till years later that we discovered what it was. And what it was what you call Cheyne-Stokes breathing, where the body's shutting down. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of different causes for that, for Cheyne-Stokes. One of them can actually be bacterial meningitis as well. But the problem is that the bacterial meningitis narrative just couldn't possibly fit, because he didn't have the discomfort. He wasn't having the fever. He wasn't vomiting. He wasn't having the seizures. All these telltale signs that lead up to death with bacterial meningitis, he didn't have, not a single one of them. And so my wife comes home from the activity, and we're looking at this and saying, okay, well, do we need to be concerned? What is this? Like, he seems fine, but he's got this like crescendo of breathing. And so anyways, before we had an opportunity to really figure it out as to whether we take him to the doctor or not, he stops breathing. And then I'm on 911 and whatnot. And you'll see that in the docuseries. I actually won't give away too much. Like, you can find that in the docuseries. So what happens, we end up driving him to the hospital because he started breathing again, but we take him to the hospital anyways. He'd coughed up mucus and fluid. We thought maybe he'd aspirated. So now we're driving to the hospital just to get him checked out, just to make sure that he's fine, right? Because he had stopped breathing for a moment there while I was on 911 and running down the driveway, and came back in. And to my pleasant surprise, he was breathing again. So then we're driving him, and he stops breathing again on the drive to the hospital. And then he ends up in an ambulance. And that's when this whole thing just rolls out, right? Alberta Health Service ambulance. They'd taken it over a year before. It was proactively destocked of the equipment necessary to get airway for a toddler. My son went over 8.5 minutes without any oxygen in the ambulance. We're not apprised to this. They're not telling us this. And we're trying to figure out what's going on. That by the time he's at the hospital, he's now hooked up to everything, and he's non-responsive, like entirely non-responsive. Well, they transport him. They begin the transport process to Calgary, and they discovered that there was an electrolyte imbalance, and they treated him for it. And even though he'd gone that 8.5 minutes without oxygen, he reanimates. He's coming alive, right?
Mm.
And they're afraid he's going to pull out his intubation tube. So then they hit him with a paralytic medication that unfortunately was contraindicated for an electrolyte imbalance and would cause cardiac issues. And then all of a sudden, like when we're reading the medical records years later, we see a 30/20 blood pressure, and then we see nothing for over an hour. They complete blacked out all of the medical records. No medical records available. So something took place that they felt the need to literally scrap the evidence because it would have been so obviously damning for him. When a year after his passing, we're struggling as a family, right? We're like super struggling, of course, as you can imagine. There's a major void in our family. My wife, gives birth to our third son, July 26th of that year, so 4 months after the passing of Ezekiel. And there's just this big hole in the family, right? We've now got this, 4-year-old son who lost his best friend, doesn't have a playmate. We've got a baby, and we've got a hole right in the center where there should be another child there. And it was some dark times. It was like, I'm talking, there was times that I just couldn't sleep, and I would go and walk the country roads, right? Because we're out in the boonies here. Just walk the country roads as the sun's starting to come up, and just be like crying out, saying, "Where are you? Like, how could this happen? This doesn't make sense." Like, it was so incredibly paradigm shattering, even to the theology that I was holding on to in relation to how Mormons have it characterized. I'm like, this just doesn't make sense. We're all here for a purpose. What was his purpose, right? He died at a 1.5 years old. Like, what was his purpose? Like, he was deprived of that purpose. And then you start thinking about all the millions of children across the world that are dying prematurely because of war and famine and all that type of stuff. And it's like, wait a minute, like this just isn't lining up. So there were some cracks that began to happen in the theology during that time, that a lot, to a much greater degree than previous, where I just started to examine things and trying to figure things out, and just had to surrender and say, I don't know, but I know that you know. And I'd had some, personal experience before that it was, when I'm saying I know, it was a knowing. It was no longer a belief. Fortunately, I'd been gifted with experience not too far previous to all this taking place, that would serve as an anchor for me to be able to get through with my wife and my children. And I'm glad for that. But I was still absolutely confused. So now, fast forward almost a year later, a falsified autopsy report comes out that shows that they used non-clinical methodologies to determine that Ezekiel did in fact have bacterial meningitis, and that he also had a right pleural empyema, which is a well-developed infectious pancake, almost, like, if you will, a development of like almost a pancake of bacteria on the outer wall of the lung, which would constrict the breathing, right? And it takes a long time for that to develop. And anybody listening with a stethoscope would pick up on the fact that there's something going on with the breathing. And what was interesting is it was the day before he went into respiratory arrest and then cardiac arrest that he had his lungs listened to with a stethoscope, and that there was no concerns brought forward. And this is by an emergency room nurse. And so something isn't lining up, and I'm looking at this autopsy report, and I'm thinking, where are they going with this? And there was a bunch of stuff in relation to vaccines tied in there that basically, if we would have gotten vaccinated, this death would have been prevented. And I'm looking at this, and I'm trying to deduct what's logical and what's not. And I look at this, I told my wife this, I said, the only reason that they put this information into the autopsy report is if they were wanting to charge us and use this as a vaccine trial. And so now we're paranoid, because we got the autopsy report because we needed closure, and it didn't provide any closure. It only opened up more questions. And then I'm thinking, what's that non-clinical methodology, non-clinical research methodology that they utilize to determine he had bacterial meningitis? That sounds highly suspect. Anyways, sure enough, 3 months later, we get the phone call from the police, and charges are laid, failing to provide necessaries of life, up to 5 years in jail. At this point in time, I mean, we got like an 8-month-old son, and we've got a 5-year-old son. And we're just like, wow, like, how do we do this? And it's not like we got a lot of money either, right? Like, how are we going to pay for this? So we fundraised, and we got a lot of support from the community. So here in the spring of 2013, we're doing fundraisers events. We rented the school gym and had like the bouncy castles and stuff, type of stuff, and had a big kind of festival type of thing, and just titled it Stand for Truth Festival, right? Like, and we didn't even know what the truth was. We didn't know what had taken place behind the scenes, but we just felt like inclined that this is a matter of the truth needing to get out there. And the beautiful thing is it would come out, because by 2014 we end up in a preliminary hearing. Comes out that the vaccine trial, or that the trial is going to be based around vaccines. And now this is when things started to turn for myself and my wife, because I started to feel somewhere around that time. I don't have a date pegged down, but it was sometime in the 2014 year that I felt that we need to start observing the Sabbath for what it was. And I didn't even really fully understand that, but just really felt inclined towards that. And so we started to do so. And this is where it becomes a bit of an anomaly. Here we're still going to church on Sunday at the Mormon church, but yet the day before we are taking a day of rest, right? Based on our limited understanding at that point of what that actually should look like. But we're just going about this blindly. And it's not because we've been watching YouTube videos or anything like that. Like we don't even know. We're feeling this push, like just a constant push. And that same year, I'm getting this push to learn Hebrew. I'm thinking, well, why? Right? Like, what am I going to do with Hebrew? Right? Like, where do I even find a resource for that? Right? Like, I didn't even know where to begin. And it actually wasn't. It wasn't till I think spring of 2015 with the Hebrew thing that I had been talking with somebody in the health industry, that we were at this massive convention, actually the largest health conventions that they have in Canada, where all the manufacturers get together and all the retailers come and whatever. Anyways, it's a big CHFA. They have it twice a year, Toronto and Vancouver. And so I'm there and I'm talking with another manufacturer, another head of a company, and we get talking about this. Somehow we got on the topic and he said, "Oh yeah, I know this great book about learning Hebrew." It's really you? He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Okay." And so it just parked it, and it wouldn't be till later that I'd actually end up emailing him and asking him about that, and I'll get to that in a minute. And I wouldn't realize how valuable being obedient to that would be until later on, and even then, I'm probably still barely scratching the surface. So now we're going into later 2014. We discover that we're in a vaccine trial. And we discovered that they've got a big agenda against us, and we're feeling pretty hopeless. We're thinking they're not just going to drop the charges. They've got skin in the game, right? Like this is going to be big. This is going to affect every Canadian parent across the country. It's going to affect medical choices on a whole. They're not going to let this slide. And so now this is, I don't know if it was the post that I made that actually touches on this that got you to reach out, Jonathan, to me. In late 2014, I'm running around quite a bit at this point in time, business wise. And my wife's got, she's neck deep and trying to parent and take care of stuff around the house or whatever. And we just procrastinated on getting to the Christmas decorations. And I'm sitting in this very room, different setup at that point in time, but I'm sitting in this very room and I get a text from my brother in relation to the origins of Christmas. And it's in the evening and I'm just wrapping up some work and I decide to indulge. I watch one video and I say, "Whoa, wait a minute." I'm like, "Is this legit?" So now I'm pulling open the Bible, right? I'm looking, okay, the reference there. And then I'm looking, I'm now Googling, I'm now seeing, is there legitimacy to what they're saying? I'm not just going to believe that blindly. Like this is challenging a major tradition that I know is pagan. I would have told you that back in 2010, even that it was pagan. I didn't really know what that meant so much, but it's pagan. But hey, look, it's a pretty good tradition, right? And it's all about what's in my heart. I would have spewed that stuff at you. And in fact, I did about 2 years previous to these people that were Torah observant and they were keeping the Sabbath. And I went over there in December. Is that 2012? Yeah, I think it's 2012. I went over there to their house, ate lunch, and the topic of Christmas came up because, well, we're coming up on Christmas at that point in time pretty quick. And I remember just saying after this individual brought up some evidence that was contrary to why I should be observing Christmas, I just said, yeah, but God knows what's in my heart. And I wouldn't know that that's like a knee-jerk human reaction for some reason, because it's not like I heard someone else say that before. But then all of a sudden, fast forward 8 years, 9 years later, and I'm having conversations, and that's what's coming out of their mouth. I'm thinking, how are we all getting the same verbiage? Like, are we all colluding in like together on this somehow? Like, what is right? This is just weird. So,
It's almost
anyways,
like there's one delusion, and everyone kind of is tapping into that, right? Not that I hate on anyone that celebrates Christmas. My wife still does. So I'm in a mixed home with that. So I've had to learn to tone down the zealousness and just be like, I disagree, but what am I going to do? Like throw the tree outside and stomp on the presents, and everyone's like, that's not being very Christ-like. So,
hey, maybe
yeah.
Gideon. I mean, he went and cut down the Asherah, right? Like,
That's
I
my
don't
son's
know.
middle
I don't know.
name. That's my son's middle name, actually, is Gideon. So
Gideon.
yeah, he's
The enemy of the
Silas
trees.
Gideon. And just I kind of chuckled because you said you gave your son a good strong biblical name, and I did the same thing. And but his name means one who is very resilient, who cuts down things that are tough, right? And man, he's like an axe on his parents. He's just like chopping at us all the time. So I'm just trying to turn him in the right direction, and he's good to go. But he's gonna make someone, he's gonna be a good boss one day, but I don't want to be his employee.
So in essence, it's him that you have to direct to cut down that tree and stomp on the presents.
Yes.
He's the one.
But he won't.
He's the one
He won't be
that's
cut down.
right.
Yeah, but he won't be swayed. He's the swayer, not the swayee. If I could put it that way. So he'll make a great lawyer. Let's put it that way, or a great pastor. Yeah, he ain't gonna take no guff.
Good.
But he likes
Good.
to.
We need more people like that, because it's taken many years for me to develop more of a backbone and to say what needs to be said when it needs to be said. Myself, even after going through all this stuff, right? Like we need more people to take firm stances for the truth, right? Rather than being walked over. So I'm watching this video, and then I'm doing the fact check on it, right? I'm trying to see, is this legit? And I'm qualifying it. I'm like, this is not good. This is not good. Like, the evidence is largely supportive of it, and I can't find the evidence contrary to it that would say, no, it's actually this, and here's the evidence to it. I couldn't find it, so I'm trying to weigh the what evidence is available in the balances, and the case for Christmas is left lacking, like significantly lacking, and not just lacking, but what am I endorsing? What am I doing? Right? Like, and the questions posed, like, and for the first time I'm starting to open my eyes. It's not about me worshiping him the way that I want to worship him. It's about me worshiping him the way that he has directed me to worship him. And that's like the first inkling of that whole concept, because, hey, he knows what's in my heart. I'm taking this and I'm making it for him, right? Like, this is great. Surely he's pleased by it, right? Maybe not. Maybe not. All of a sudden, I'm questioning that.
That's breaking Deuteronomy 12, which he says, don't worship me like the nations around me worship their gods. Worship me this way. This is how you're set apart, right? Holy means set apart. So he's like, I want you to eat this. I want you to wear this. I want you to do these things. You'll be set apart. And that's, for me, following the Torah. That's what, Jesus told us to do, right? To be a light to the nations, light to the world. You got to be, something my grandfather used to say to my dad. I never met my grandfather, unfortunately, not yet. But I will one day. And he said, we must always be preaching, and sometimes, when absolutely necessary, use words. And that always kind of stuck with in my brain and it took me a good 30 plus years to put it to practice. But a lot of things I heard as a kid, I tried to run away from. Now I'm older and committed fully, and I cut that foreskin off my heart and said, I'm gonna do this. And ever since that, like, a lot of memories came back, and it was like, oh, like this kind of kept me alive all the way through. I had a lot of crazy times, so I should have been dead several times, but I had a lot of family members praying for me my whole life. And I definitely felt it when my grandmother passed, because she was praying on all of us all the time. And wasn't long after she passed that I fell into depression, got hooked on the SSRIs for a short while, dealt with a lot of the depression, a lot of craziness came with that. And it still took me a while to figure out, like, fighting I'm fighting the wrong battle here, right? I'm fighting myself and fighting God instead of like fighting the adversary, right? So anyway, I don't want to detract from what you're saying. Keep going. It's good. It's
No,
good stuff.
these are great points. And yeah, to continue to digress just for a moment. I mean, it's the same thing as Nadab and Abihu, right? Like they mixed strange fire. There was strict, very, very strict instructions on how to conduct oneself as in the priestly duty in the tabernacle before the congregation. And they did something and we learn what the context is leading up to that there's like this beautiful thing happening, right? Like Israel's on fire, right? Like the Spirit has come down, the cloud rests upon the tabernacle, and then they mixed some kind of strange fire, probably out of the goodness of their hearts, right? Good intentions. And what happens? They're struck down, they're burned, right? And then the same thing happens with the golden calf, right? Hey,
yes,
with good intentions. It was legitimately good intentions that
I would bring that even to the New Testament, and you have in Acts 2, and you have Sapphira or Anna and Sapphira.
No, is it? Yeah.
Or sorry, not Anna and Sapphira. I lost my the
Ananias.
Ananias and Sapphira.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. And they were giving. They gave a portion of it.
Yep.
They were doing it apparently with a good heart, apparently, right?
Yep.
So yeah,
but they held back and they lied about it, right? And
the road paved to hell is it with good intentions?
Yeah,
like
exactly. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that's the problem. Is that we begin to interpret stuff through our distorted perspective that has been distorted through society, and then we start to project that into our worship. We project it into how we raise our kids. We project it everywhere, and the problem is that it has lasting consequences, and consequences that we're not even cognizant of.
Yeah.
And it's not until we are convicted by studying the word that we then look at this and say, wait a minute, I'm not doing that right. And when they didn't do it right, this was the consequence. Heaven forbid that happens to me, right? Like it's a real good thing that the presence of Yah isn't here right now, because based on what I'm doing, I would be struck down by doing that in his presence. Right?
Yeah.
So
thankfully we got some grace and favor to learn this stuff, right? And that's something that people always like to talk grace, but the way I look at it is like, okay, grace also means favor, and right now we're being given the favor, the favorable time and space to make these mistakes, because we didn't grow up under the letter of the law, right? We didn't grow up in a strict sense. Like we didn't at 6 years old start memorizing the Torah. We didn't it wasn't commonplace. So we're from outside the promise, we're coming in. We're going to need a period of time to disciple, to learn all these commandments, where we should have spent our lifetime learning these things, but now we got to learn them. I'm 38 and I'm 2 years in, fully committed, and I'm still I'm going through the scriptures and like, man, I forgot about this, or how come I didn't see this before? Like I need to put this to practice. Like there's so much to pack in there when you got all the other stresses and things in life going in there. And then the other thing I realized too is that back then, before Jesus came and died on the cross, resurrected, became our high priest, ministering in the temple, before the Father continually, and now we can enter there anytime and pray. Before we couldn't enter and get atonement for our sins at any time. You had to wait. You had to bring an offering forward. You had to make a confession to a priest. Maybe you had to travel a week, and all that time you're not covered, right? You don't have any atonement, so that would be like that'd be a stressful time, right? It's but now I can alleviate that guilt. I can pray wherever I am, whenever, and say, as soon as the conviction hits, I can pray and I can deal with it, get that atonement, and then get that Holy Spirit flowing back again, and then turn that around. Where back then they didn't have that grace period. They had to hold themselves very strictly in that sense, right? So I think that's what the grace is talking about, and people kind of use it as a way to be like, I've got grace now. There's no more law. I'm like, well, you don't have grace without law. Otherwise, what are you having grace from, right?
Exactly. What qualifies you for his favor, right? What puts you in his good graces, if you will? Let's term it that way. And
it's funny that people don't use that. We don't really use that terminology much anymore. You don't hear that, but I grew up with that. You better be in my good graces, boy.
Yeah. Right. It's like, and as parents now, like we can relate to that. Hey, my son is out of order. He's not in my good graces. He needs to qualify for that grace. Straight up. And and we're provided those instructions on how to receive that grace, right? How to be found in his favor. And we know when we're in his favor, and we know when we're not. When we walk astray, we grieve the Spirit. Don't tell me that just because you profess to believe in Jesus Christ, that somehow just by professing to believe that, but yet you're walking astray, that you got that Spirit with you, because you don't. Like you, and I've been there many times where I know when I've grieved the Spirit, and boy, I'm telling you, when it happens in like a moment's notice, like from, maybe I succumb to anger or whatever, right? Or lust or whatever. Like it's just, I'm finding myself on my knees and I'm just saying, I want it back. I'm sorry. Like, because the contrast is so stark. Whereas when it happens over a slow fade, that's where we need to be very, very careful, because if the contrast isn't there, sometimes we're oblivious to what's taking place in our life because we're letting, a slow process of erosion take place. But I'm telling you, been there so many times. I'm in his good graces when I'm walking the way that he wants me to walk, right? Not because of some professional
the blessings start coming.
Yes. And that was actually one of my most recent posts was exactly that, illustrating the blessings. And it started with, because I put out the post at this time of year, it starts off with that 2014 situation where I get done, watching those videos and researching, and I'm trying to figure this out. And I go upstairs and I tell my wife, oh boy, as you can imagine, I'm sure you can imagine. I mean, this is a struggle that we go through, guys.
Yeah.
She didn't like that news. Yep. She loves to decorate. She is a festive person. I mean, she's being hired out to do weddings at that time, type of stuff. Like, she is a wedding decorator. She is just into that. That's her thing. Christmas, same thing. Loves to decorate. So, anyways, it went over like a lead balloon, as you can imagine. But she didn't reject the truth of it. She just projected her resentment onto me for a few weeks. Wanted to shoot the messenger. Yeah. So we didn't have Christmas that year. We just didn't. And it wasn't because I came down with a force. She couldn't bring herself to have Christmas either after she had dug into it herself, looked at the facts, and she just realized, I can't participate in this. And I'm like, I'm at the same place. So it's a real beautiful thing that we were in lockstep in that way. Just women are more emotional beings, and these festivities, these times of festivity, they're emotional times, right? I mean, we all have beautiful nostalgic memories of family and friends gathering together during these times, and it's a hard thing because it feels like you're kind of kicking all that to the curb when you distance yourself and separate yourself from the pagan holy day, if you will. Let's call it for what it is. It's a pagan.
That's what holiday means. Yeah, it's holy day. Yeah.
So we didn't celebrate it that year, and we basically, we didn't need to vow to never celebrate again, but we just didn't celebrate it. I can't even remember what we did that year. I can't remember if we ended up going and visiting any friends or family during that time. But we didn't put like a strict caveat to it that, hey, we won't be anywhere where someone has a Christmas tree or whatever. We wouldn't do that until years later, when we started to realize the impact it was having on the kids, the confusion, as well as condoning that type of stuff. I think coming around 2016, I think was the first year that we just went and visited this group called the 12 Tribes. You probably heard of them. We're good friends with them. So we're like, hey, they don't celebrate Christmas. They don't celebrate New Year's. Let's just go hang out and work on their farm there and help them out during this time. And
is the 12 Tribes, is that the ones tied to the Yellow Deli?
Oh yeah, my favorite restaurant.
Oh really? Yeah, they had one in Chilliwack, my old hometown in Chilliwack, BC.
Yeah.
And they actually had they had their farms down by the river where I used to walk my dog. And and I met a bunch of the people from there, but my dogs had an incident with the guy that ran the actual place, and so I stopped going down there because my dog actually lunged at him, but he's coming out of the thick fog along the river there, and he was like shouting or praying or something loud, and my dog just reared up. He puffed up like a lion, got it, and he's like a 200-pound big. He was a Saint Bernard Bloodhound cross. Never once raised a hackle at anybody. The babies crawl on him. He was fine. This guy just appeared out of the fog, and he just like, I was like Samson fighting a lion kind of situation there. All of a sudden, I was like, "What's going on?" And he like fell down the dike into the blackberry bushes, and I was like,
Oh no
"Sorry,"
way.
and I got out of there. And then I found out later it was the guy that ran the 12 tribes thing there, and there was mixed reviews in town about those people. So I was like, "Well, I'm not going to tell anybody about that because I didn't know if it was going to go good or bad," and I felt really bad, but no one got hurt. But it was just one of those. I was just like, "Well, I'm going to stop walking my dog down the river when it's so foggy." But it's just kind of funny that you know some of them, because I was like, "Man, that's crazy," because I've heard really good things about their food at the Yellow Deli at the very least, right?
Oh,
So
it's
I haven't looked too
fantastic
much.
food.
Yeah,
And
I
you
haven't
can
looked too
trust it.
much
It's
into their.
clean food because they're
Mhm.
Yeah.
Torah observant, right? So,
Mhm.
but yeah, and this becomes part of the story. In kind of growing into all this, it's just amazing how, we're like pawns on a chessboard and we don't even know where we're going to be moved. But when we are open to just surrender, we get moved, and life becomes like just this phenomenal adventure. And it became a phenomenal adventure even while we're going through all the stuff. See, we're under charges. We know we're going to court. It's costing a lot of money. We don't know what it's going to do. Like, we don't know where the media is going to go with it or whatever. So anyways, now we're into 2015, and this is where it becomes pinnacle with the Mormon Church. This is when, this is like the crux of the whole of it. I'm reading, their literature, their scriptures, if you will. I'm saying, wait a minute, they're not practicing the way that they're supposed to. So then you start asking questions. Like, wait a minute, this is, if we're following, like, we follow the prophet, hey, like, you say Joseph Smith is the prophet of the restoration, right? The restoration of the gospel. If he restored the gospel and this is what he was commanded to do, why aren't we doing this, right? So now I'm just questioning, right? And boy, and I'm doing it through a respectful way. Like, I'm trying to keep it private and all that type of stuff. The first time that's not the first time I asked the question was before the whole congregation, but not my fault. I felt impressed to do it, and I knew that it was going to generate a response. I didn't want to do it. And I pushed it and pushed it back to the very end, and it became like the last question. And I finally said, I'm going to be obedient to this. I don't want to, right? I'm feeling impressed to do this. I don't want to do it, right? I'm not going to, right? I asked the question. You just hear like this rumbling throughout the whole congregation. I'm like, oh boy, what have I done? Yeah, anyways, the next week later, I'm sitting in front of the stake president, which is like over top of, like, I don't know, 1,000 members, whatever, right? And he's grilling me and accusing me of being associated with this group or whatever. I'm like, I don't even know who that group is. Like, what are you talking about? I just felt impressed to ask the question. Take it for what you will. You either have to say I'm deceived or I'm not deceived. That's it. But I'm not associated with these guys. Like, don't go trying to just, dismiss what I had to say based on my affiliation with these people that I have no affiliation with. Anyways, so it became heated. And they were wanting to excommunicate me. They were threatening, basically, that I was going to go stand before the council, and unless I step back from my position. I said I can't. I can't step back from it. I'm not going to. Call the council, right? Like, that's where I'm at. Like, and so I'm feeling a strong conviction to move forward with it. And so, anyways, they never did it. They never called the council. I'm like, okay. Anyways, now this is June of 2015. Well, July 2015, we feel impressed, both of us, my wife and I, once again, lockstep. This was beautiful because it wasn't always this way. We feel impressed to move to BC, to Nelson. And we had no real familiarity with the place. And we didn't know why. And we had this one place in mind that I'd seen online about 3 months previous that would come back the odd time. I think, well, hey, we're situated here. Like, we're putting commercial greenhouses up, and we're getting settled in. I've got no intention of moving. We feel impressed that we need to move. I'm like, okay, well, that's strange. I thought we were supposed to settle things down here. Okay. So anyways, we drive out to this place, and it didn't end up being the place. But in the whole process, like, we felt impressed. I think it's like on a Thursday, and by Friday we're out driving there, and then like, literally packed up the kids, whatever, took the Prius, drove out, whatever, had a nice mountain drive, and we get out there, and a mutual friend, or a friend, sorry, says, I've got this other friend that's there right now. She's typically in Vancouver, but you got to go check out her place, off-grid place. I want you to meet her. So we went to meet her, and she said, "Where are you guys staying tonight?" Well, we don't know. We don't have a place yet. Well, why don't you stay here? Right? Big place. Okay, sure. Thanks. And then we went and looked at the other place to see, and it looked right. Geodesic greenhouse, almost off grid. Everything logically lined up. Didn't line up spiritually. We're like, what's up with that? We get back to the other place, and she says, well, I need somebody to take care of this place over the winter. And we're like, really? Because it felt really peaceful there. We're like, okay. And so it was rolled out on a silver platter, right? Or just like, right, the red carpet was rolled out, silver platter here you go. It was just, and it was like paradise. Like, I'm talking complete paradise. Like, it's like every checkbox, right? Mountain stream right behind the house that you could hear.
Nelson is beautiful.
I've been trying to move there for years, but it just never worked out. So I'm about an hour away from Revelstoke. I'm on the west side of the Rockies, right? So west side of Revelstoke. But that's the closest. I've always wanted to move to the Rockies, and I can sort of see them if I go down the road to the lake, way at the end of the road. I can see them in the distance, right? But that's just kind of funny, because I was like, I always wanted to, we almost moved to Salmo once, and just like same thing, it never worked out. And I always felt everything lined up, but I just didn't feel like I should pull the trigger on it. And this is back before I was even walking in obedience to the Father, right? So it's just kind of funny that all those what ifs in the past, and you don't know that everything's bringing it to this moment now, right? So always interesting looking back retrospectively.
Another thing about Nelson, there's a lot of old buildings and symbolism in that town.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's you want to talk about spiritual strongholds? Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Nelson is, and so fortunately we weren't in Nelson. We were about 800 feet elevation above Nelson, as high up as you can get in the mountain. On the mountain, it was crown land all after that. And so it was beautiful. No neighbors above. And it was so needed, because at that point in time, like, this is when we're prepping for court. And what we learned, and I felt inclined towards this 12 tribes group. I heard about them. I hired a rep in 2013, and we went to go to the Yellow Deli one time after a training session, and we showed up at the Yellow Deli at probably like 5:00 on Friday, and sun was still up, but it was already closed down for Sabbath. They closed at 3. I'm like, oh, interesting. And so I felt kind of this inclination that I need to meet these people at some point. Well, I found out that they had a farm just 15 minutes down the road from where we were at when we moved onto the side of the mountain there. And I'm like, oh, interesting. So we went and met them, and just absolutely clicked. And it was amazing, because we were actually an answer to prayer for them, because they had been praying. Questions are not welcome in Mormonism. That's right. No, in any dogmatic religion, questions are not welcome. But
the truth can't stand up to questions. Everyone knows this, so be quiet.
Exactly. Yep. And that's
Sorry,
what we
had to show you that.
And so we were actually an answer to prayer for them, because they had been praying about how to get our supplements, the Truehope supplements, and they never knew who I was before this, and make it in an affordable way for some of their people that were struggling with mental health conditions. And so I showed up at a Friday minha. I'd been invited from the restaurant there, and they're talking amongst themselves. And the one lady says, who's that over there? And, oh, David Stephan is with, some supplement company. And she's like, what, like Truehope? And the other person's like, oh yeah, that's what it was. And she's like, no way, right? And so, because they'd just been praying about this as a council on how to get the supplements to their people, and we had a bunch of like out of date stuff that from a failed project for the Hutterites that we were able to divvy over to them. And so it worked out really well. It's amazing. Once again, that pond just being moved to answering in prayers and stuff. But it was a beautiful answer to our prayers in just helping us get through everything, because we were really, as we're building up to this big court case, the first trial in 2016, it's heavy, and we're having to relive a lot of stuff, and we don't know all the facts, and we're still questioning and saying, what could we have done better as parents? Like, how could we have prevented Ezekiel's death? We know there's something wrong with the autopsy report. It doesn't make sense, but and so you're starting to beat yourself up. And so living in paradise and being able to go, actually not just being able to, having to go for daily walks, because I had to go check the dam almost on a daily basis, because it was prone to freezing up. And once it froze up, power went out, our micro hydro was down, and our water was down. And I had minutes to get it back in order before everything else started to freeze up, right? So So I'd have to walk up there and just clean off the leaves off the grate that would filter everything out, and the water that we'd take into the microhydro and all that, and then just check it, right? And so, but it was this beautiful, like, world-class trail type of thing, like that where you'd see in a national park up along this mountain stream, but it was mine. It was private. I was the only one walking it, right? And so those were my walk and talks with the Most High, just praying and meditating on my way up there, and just being in his glory, with all the foliage and stuff. Like Nelson is, I mean, for those who don't know, it's an inland rainforest. Like it is beautiful. Like
with a massive lake that's almost like an ocean view, almost kind of beautiful.
Yeah. And so we're living in paradise. And so it was
hot springs everywhere too.
Yeah. It was a perfect place for us to prepare for all that, and to be in daily praise, right? And so we're learning more obedience during this time. Now, we also didn't observe Easter because Easter went out the window as fast as Christmas did. As soon as we learned about Christmas, like Easter, Ishtar, Ashtaroth, right? Like you're out the window. Like you're even worse.
So, question: were you doing any feast at this time, or just not doing?
Man, it was boring. We were just living in a void. Good question.
Nothing to replace that with. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's part of the problem, is that for those that are considering, not just considering, those who are feeling impressed, convicted to come out of Christmas and Easter, embrace the feast days. They are so beautiful. We unfortunately went years. We went, oh boy, we went 6 years. 6 years.
Oh,
with
wow.
nothing. No festivities, right? But also largely due to, one, there's an intimidating factor around the feast days.
And yes, there is.
There's an intimidating factor until you just go and read the word and realize how simple they are. Just keep the simple nature of it, right? That's it. Don't complicate it. And so we're like, how are we supposed to observe it? How are the Jews doing it? How candles? We got to light candles? Like how does this work, right? And and we overcomplicated it and realized that the traditions of man were preventing us from just embracing the ways of Yah. Right? So now we're void of all the feast days. We're going through court constantly, and oftentimes they would actually line up at around the times that the feast days should be, September and April and stuff. We're like constantly in court, right, throughout the years. Anyway, so we have this big trial, 2016, and that's when we get smeared. That's when it goes big, like international tabloid style. We were like the most hated couple in Canada. It was phenomenal what CBC did. Like they just smeared it. It was so fallacious. In fact, I had two reporters after the first CBC report came out. I had two reporters come up to me. One that I knew fairly well because he only lived a few houses down from me and across the street for many years when I lived in Raymond years before. And even went for he had a road bike, I had a road bike. We went pedal biking, right? That type of thing together. And then another reporter who kind of knew us came up. Both of them came up the day after and said, what CBC did was like horrific. And the one who didn't know us so well said, my supervisor came down on me and said, why didn't you get me that story? And she's like, because it wasn't true. And then unfortunately, all of the different media outlets eventually aligned with the narrative that CBC had developed, where we're trying to treat bacterial meningitis with maple syrup and fruit and juice and smoothies laced with horseradish and onion and hot pepper, and like just all of this, like just crazy. Like, first of all, I've never drinking a smoothie with hot pepper and horseradish and right. Like I couldn't possibly get an 18-month-old to drink that, like a smoothie with that, right? It's called fire cider. It's a tincture that you make, right? You can buy it from the store.
Tyler Porter in the chat that made the comment about don't question anything. He actually makes that stuff. I was friends on Facebook, so I seen he was making that fire stuff. And no, you can't get an infant to drink that stuff. I mean, you're gonna have to put a gun to me to be like, drink this stuff, and be like, it's probably better than getting shot. I'll give it a try. But I'm not a huge fan of the extra spicy fire cider, but I've heard it works. But with an infant or 18-month-old, even like they don't even. It's hard to even get them to eat anything that's not like fruit based, basically. Unless you're blessed, like my son was eating meat and things like that at like 6 months old, but then he's a go-getter. He wants to do everything before his time anyway. And my daughter was a year behind everything. You couldn't get her to speed up, so I'm balanced between the two. But anyway. And for those that don't know, CBC is the Communist Broadcast Corporation here in Canada. And they are state-funded They're what the British call taking a good look at something. They're a propaganda. You take a propaganda at things in the British language there, and that's what they are. I know for myself, if I'm going on a long trip and I don't have any music or anything, which I seldom listen to now anyway, but if I just listen to the CBC programming on the radio, within about an hour or two, like, I hate myself. I'm a
Mhm.
white heterosexual male with children, and I just hate myself. I'm like, I can't listen to that stuff, right? It's terrible. Um,
Yep.
it's pretty insidious, the way that they kind of work things in there, and after a while it's just like, I can't listen. It's just drivel, right? So
Oh yeah.
um I don't take any story from the CBC very very seriously. So, but they are effective. For most people out there, they have their kind of, what's that movie, They Live, with Roddy Piper there, that old movie with the sunglasses he finds and he puts them on and he sees the truth.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah.
very trying to get people to put those glasses on is a struggle, right? So
Oh yeah.
CBC definitely has kind of blanketed everyone, unless you're kind of aware, which I think some people are getting a bit more aware to these things, but um, they're aware without the truth, though, right? They're just aware that this isn't right, but a lot of people aren't turning to, the Most High and His law and His Son for the truth, right? So they're still lost. So I think the CBC should get disbanded and defunded, but I don't think they're going anywhere
No,
No,
oh,
anytime
absolutely
not
not.
soon.
No,
No.
no. This communist regime needs a propaganda machine for sure, and so they've.
Hmm.
It's not just CBC now. I mean, they're buying out the other media corps as well to do their bidding.
Facebook, all of
Yeah,
them.
it's. I mean, we are living in a propaganda world, and what's amazing through all this, we're getting death threats because
Mhm.
of what CBC is doing. But on the contrast, there's people reading the CBC articles and saying this doesn't line up. Something's wrong here. Discernment, and so this is so important that
Mhm.
we better be seeking for discernment in this world. Otherwise, we will be led astray. I promise you. Because
Mhm.
I saw good friends turn from us based on what they were reading from CBC. And then I had people come to us and become good friends because they were able to discern that there was something wrong with what CBC was providing. They had nothing else to base it on. They had none of the real evidence. They weren't seeing what was going on in the courtroom, but they knew there was something wrong and that we shouldn't be vilified, that we were being vilified. And so we had new friends coming in who had the spirit of discernment clearly. And then we had other friends leaving the party that obviously not only did not have the spirit of discernment, but didn't have the tenacity to even just come and ask the question and say, is this true?
Mm.
Right? Instead, we just saw people disappear out of our lives. And so we get lambasted. And then
Mhm.
it's so bad. Like the court proceedings are so bad. It's discovered though during the court proceedings that my son didn't have bacterial meningitis. And this is discovered by a whistleblower who was fired for being a whistleblower. She was the chief medical examiner of Alberta at the time that my son passed away. So she was actually the employer to the pathologist who falsified my son's autopsy report. And what we found out during that time is that they actually had to use a PCR test. Now, many of us will know what that is based on the whole COVID
Mhm.
sham. Is that PCR test will get you the false positive that you're looking for. I mean, you can
Mhm.
find anything you want with a PCR test. Just how
Yeah.
many cycles are you going to do? How much are you going to
Yeah.
amplify? Right? And that's what they had to do in order to determine that my son had bacterial meningitis. It was the only way they could do it, and it wasn't approved for those purposes during that time. So the whole thing, it was legitimately falsified. And it turns out that they withheld an X-ray that showed that my son's lungs were clear upon arrival, whereas in the autopsy report they had one of the listed causes of death was a right pleural empyema, which is a well-developed lung infection, right on the outer wall of the lung in the pleural cavity. And so we're starting to see all this evidence. We're like, this is dirty. Like they are going so dirty on us. And so, anyways, there's no way the jury's going to find us guilty. And so then the judge misinstructs the jury, even though there's like we're having hearings about this with the jury not present, about how the judge is supposed to instruct. The Crown's arguing, my lawyer's arguing, and they're going back and forth. And my lawyer's like, this is outside of case law. You have to instruct this way. And the judge finally just like, nope, this is the way we're doing it. And sure enough, the jury's instructed. They leave a day later. They come back, and 6 out of the 12 are crying You don't cry. Let's say that you were part of a murder trial and you're like sure that murderer or that the guy is guilty, right? And you're part of the jury. You're not going to cry for him when you find him guilty. In fact, you're going to be like, I hope you burn him, right? Like, type of thing. Like you're gone. Like go to jail, rot, that type of thing.
Yep.
You're going to actually share some of that vitriol towards him by nature, right? Maybe some of us would be able to see through some of it and actually have a sense of compassion. Be like, wow, right?
Yeah.
The guy's guilty. He has to go to jail. So 6 out of 12 are crying and they find us guilty. I end up in 3 weeks solitary confinement because of what the media did at that point in time. Because I'm not stopping speaking. No, I'm saying, wait a minute. Alberta Health Services removed the equipment necessary to save my son's life on that night. That's criminal negligence. And it resulted in his death. The paramedics were demanding that equipment for a year, for 1 whole year. They wanted it back in the ambulances in that zone. Alberta Health Services didn't fulfill that request until 1 week after the passing of my son. It took the death of my son for them to actually take it serious and put the equipment back in. It's not like they ran out of equipment because, we used up this intubation tube on this toddler this night and nobody brought it back. No, somebody went in when Alberta Health Services took over the ambulance services and they actually took that equipment out. And so I wasn't willing to shut up. I'm saying, look, there's a double standard here. I said, even if I am guilty, which I'm not, even if I am, why aren't they on stand too? They played a role at minimum, if not the causation of my son's death. And yet they're not going to jail. And so, so then the media comes out. Oh, basically, the way they categorize it, when you read between the lines and the feeling you get is, an unremorseful baby killer. Well, in jail, they have their own justice system amongst the inmates. And unremorseful baby killers don't do so well.
Generally,
so the guards,
no.
Yeah. So the guard said, look, you can check off that you want to go to, why is that? Why I'm losing that term now? Not general.
Well, you got like Gen Pop, which is general population.
Yeah, Gen Pop.
Yeah. And then you have like your, whatchamacallit, like your security wing where it's,
protective custody, right? Or solitary confinement, right?
So
yeah, sure enough, he says, you can check it off if you want. But he says, we're putting you into, we're going to put you into protective custody. And it's a good thing they did because somebody that was close to my dad, their son got out of jail like a week later, and there was plans being laid. They were waiting for me because they've been watching me in the media, in CBC. They've been watching me in the media, and they were just waiting for me to come in because they were going to do me in. And so here I am, 3 weeks solitary confinement. I finally got out on appeal. I was supposed to be there longer, but I finally get out on appeal because we're appealing it, and then the Alberta Appeals Court just does a dirty on us. And then we finally end up in the bid for the Supreme Court of Canada in May of 2018. And then 7 Supreme Court justices unanimously decide that it was actually an unfair trial. So then they send it back to trial again, right? It's like, but where's the money? We've put out all this money, hundreds of thousands of dollars now. Can we have some money back to get back to the second trial now? Like this,
yeah.
Right. So now we're like getting bankrupted bad here. And so now we're moving in. Now this is where it gets really liberating. Now we're looking at 2018, and we're still living the way that we ought to be. We haven't done anything else really much different. We're still not observing Christmas. At this point in time, we're not going to the Mormon church anymore. Like it's done, right? Like
keeping Sabbath and that still too, and all that. Yeah.
Yep, keeping Sabbath.
Were you doing any eating at this time, or
we ate clean starting like 2010. That was just for health reasons.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So Bible aside, so if anybody wants to argue about eating clean, it's like, go ahead, enjoy the consequences of poor health. You eat that way, you will suffer the natural consequences. Debate it biblically all day if you want, but the fact of the matter is you're going to suffer the consequences here and now for eating unclean, right? That's simple. So we had already, based on where we were at in our lives and trying to live as healthy as possible, we were already eating clean. And so, and then it wouldn't be revealed to us later about Leviticus 11, what it actually meant, because the first time that I remember reading it back in like the mid 2000s, I'm like, this is superstitious. What is this about? Once I began to understand the nature of parasites and the nature of toxins, of course you're not going to want to eat bottom feeders out of the ocean and the garbage men of the ocean that have all of this toxicity. And you're not going to want to eat swine, which is also a garbage man of the above ground, but also has some incredible parasites that thrive in you just as well as they would in a swine. Why? Because we're so close. That's why, you have desiccated thyroid coming from pig. That's why you have different parts, whatever, like that are interchangeable in a sense, because pigs are so close to us. Any parasite that thrives in them, and they are filled with them, will thrive in you. And those parasites,
I
I'm
noticed
telling you,
a couple of years, 3 years ago now, I was living on living on like a ranch type scenario out in Falkland, which is out kind of in between Kamloops and Vernon in BC. It's kind of like just a little highway town, and it's kind of mountainous and kind of semi-arid, foresty. And but I was where I lived, I had the option to buy in and raise a pig, and I wasn't eating clean. I wasn't, walking in the faith at all. And so I said, yeah, sure. So I ended up helping kill, butcher, skin, cut up about 5 or 6 of these pigs, and it was disgusting. It was like I've cut up animals before, deer, grouse, cows before on other farms I worked on, but pigs were just nasty. Like the amount of fat and the stink and like the skin and everything was just gross, right? But I was like, whatever, I'm just gonna shoulder it and just do it. Like I put my money in this. This is what we're gonna eat for the next while. But then the neighbor across the way saw us out there with the tractor and the gambrel hooks, like shooting and skinning pigs for that couple days. She's like, the butchers are all backed up. I got 6 pigs that I bought from these Mennonite farmers. So like these long, narrow, tall kind of pigs. And yeah, they've all been dewormed and all this and that. So we ended up killing and butchering these 6 pigs in the day. I got paid a bunch of money to do it, but it was horrific because we cut open like the 5th pig, and like its intestines were full of these worms about this long, and like we opened it up, the gut pile came out, and the whole intestines were moving. It was like, I'm talking like the entire thing was just worms in there, and I was like, I don't really feel so good about eating that pig I got in my freezer now, right? I was just like, and I don't want to get too gory with the details, but the guy I was working with there for it ended up shooting this pig a couple times and it kept missing because it kept ducking its head. So he tosses me the gun and I'm trying to reload it because he didn't reload it fully, and he just jumps on this thing and starts cutting it with the knife. And that pig was screaming and screaming, and I was like, it sounds just like a person,
oh
right?
yeah,
And I was like, man, pigs are just like people. Like I was just kind of like always turned off on pork chops. The only thing I really liked, back then was bacon. But even now, I'm like, it just makes my stomach turn when I think about it. It's so gross. I
oh yeah.
never liked pork chops growing up, any of that kind of stuff, and so I ended up not even eating all of that pig meat that we got. And I just after that I stopped buying it. Besides the odd bacon, and then so when came into understanding like we got to keep these feast laws and these food laws and things like that, I was like, that was a pretty easy transition for me. But the difficulty I find now is in other products, especially like there's, and it doesn't even have to be pig, but like a lot of candies and flavorings is made with castoreum, which comes from beavers, right? Beaver oil, and then they put like pig products, gelatin, in almost everything. So it's like, so it does force you to actually, I have to cut out a lot of other foods in my diet as well. So it's not just eating certain things, it's also not eating a lot of these other things that contain all these, toxins and just like things got like a huge list of ingredients. I'm like, I don't really want to eat that. But I
Which
mean,
you want to eat anyways, right? And so it's
yeah.
actually a blessing in disguise for us with the lifestyle changes that we've made. It's the exception that we ever find anything that has gelatin caps from
hmm
porcine. Okay, out it goes, right? We didn't consume it. Good thing we checked before. But it's the exception for us. So even if we were like, if we weren't doing our due diligence, it'd be rare that we'd ever consume something that would be defiling in essence, right? That'd be unclean. And so, but that's a beautiful place to get, because that's when we begin to do much better health wise. We start to live that lifestyle. Whereas the mainstream stuff out there, I'm telling you, there's a reason that they're putting all of that type of stuff in there. It's to continually kind of, defile us. It's to bring us down. It's to weaken us, spiritually, physically, which really those are inseparable. I mean,
I was I was like really thinking about this the other day, and I'm just like, I was laying in my bed. I'm just thinking about all these strong, mighty men that we hear about in the Bible. All these guys were fighting giants, killing lions, and all of a sudden I was like, man, they must have had the best food ever to be strong, amazing fighting. And someone was talking about the Maccabees and stuff too, Judah Maccabees and all this. I'm like, man, they must have been like, they were. God gave them this thing, and I hear like so many pastors and like the Argyle Solberg or whatever lately said, oh, that this is they did it just to be separated, had no health reasons at all. I'm like, look at these guys. These were warriors. They could run for days without nothing. You're telling me they weren't fit and healthy and they ate what God told them, and that's why they could win these wars like it was like nothing? Come on.
Yep. 100% with you. I'm going to touch on this, continue to digress for a minute here. I mean, with the whole pork thing. First of all, when cannibals are interviewed and they're asked what it tastes like, typically they'll say, or what human meat tastes like, they'll be like, well, it tastes like pork, right? So that's the first thing. So get that in your head, right? Like you're basically consuming something that tastes like a human. The second thing is MS. That disease is being discovered to be caused by a particular parasite in the cerebral spinal fluid, right? It's been overlooked and overlooked and overlooked, and there's nothing. But the science is now emerging on it that, hey, without fail, what we're finding post-mortem in the cerebral spinal fluid from people that died that have MS is these particular parasites. Well, what's interesting is when you take a look at the correlation between the consumption of pork and the prevalence of MS developing in humans, you're like almost your chances of developing MS without consuming pork is super low. As soon as you start consuming pork, it goes way up, way up. Your chances of MS, there's a direct correlation between pork consumption and the prevalence of MS in the human populace. So that's just one. There's quite a few diseases that are directly linked to pork. And I can't remember the names. I haven't memorized the names of these different parasites, but there's a particular parasite that loves to gravitate towards the brain and start punching holes in the brains. And that is almost exclusive to getting it from pork consumption.
One day I'll give you my testimony on that.
I don't got to worry about that one getting me. So he'll be starving. No, I'm just kidding. I don't eat.
I actually have I haven't shared this part of my testimony, but I'll do another day. But yes, I have something very similar. I grew up raising pigs as well and killing them and eating them, and I had mental health issues from the time we started doing pigs onwards. So at the age of 14, I started having crazy mental health issues. So, but that's right when we started raising our own pigs and eating them. Not that we didn't eat them before, but we had a lot more. Like that was like almost a staple night supper diet kind of deal. So yeah.
So anybody who wants to argue about unclean, clean meats, whether it's applicable today, the fact of the matter is that the consequences still apply. You can't get around them.
I'd curse if you do them, a blessing if curses and blessings, man. That's what it comes down to. And we want to think in terms of it's sin or not. No, it's a blessing or a curse, man. That's what God has made.
And he's just trying to look out for our well-being, right? Because the fact of the matter is that healthy people are able to be more spiritual. When you're suffering, when you're struggling, and you have brain fog and all that type of stuff. Tell me how your spiritual life is, right?
Well, it becomes more selfish in a sense. That's what happened to me. Part of this, because you're always terrified. You're always in the state of
fight or flight or
fight or flight. You can't think about anybody else. You can't focus on anybody else because you're only worried about yourself. You're depressed. You're always in a state of anxiety. So you're always thinking about how you can try to make yourself better, and you never focus on anybody else. That's part of my journey was throughout this too, is learning about that, right? So
what you laid out there is a common pattern in mental illness itself, right? Is that we become closed in. It becomes about us, right? And I can relate to that myself growing up with it as well, is that when you're in that state, you're focused on, number one here, your ability to be empathetic and compassionate to others. It can largely be rendered non-existent.
Yep.
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 So, okay, I'll continue on the story. So now we're in 2018. We're back to trial again. Now I'm feeling impressed that I need to self-represent. And now this is a high-profile case, and it's a complex case, right? This particular law itself, right, or the breach thereof, it's a complex one. Even just in standard criminality, it's like a hybrid law because it's not like, it's what a reasonable, prudent parent would do. It's not the act was done, and so now we have actus reus, and then mens reus is qualified to go to jail type of thing. No, there's this reasonable, prudent parent test as well that's brought into it. It's not just about what happened and go to jail type of thing because you had the mind to do it. It's a hybrid law. Even the judge in the second trial stated that it's just a really strange law, the failing to provide necessaries of life. It leaves it really ambiguous, and it can be used as a baseball bat for just about anything against any parents or guardians that the government wants to go after. And so I'm really hesitant about this, but I'm feeling impressed that I got to do it. But I'm fearing what people around me are going to say about it, because they're going to be like, you're putting your family in jeopardy. What are you doing, you idiot? Like my wife, she's not open to it, right? Like she's terrified. I don't blame her, but I'm feeling impressed to do it. And I just can't bring myself to do it. And so finally, now we're getting broke at this point in time, right? And we're like $30,000 or $40,000 in debt to the lawyers, which is a drop in the bucket compared to the totality of everything, but we're still in debt that much. So we're a number of months behind in payments. And I was like, oh, okay. And then we have a disagreement with the lawyers because we started to uncover my brother with a group of people. They started to go through all the medical files, and they were going through them with a fine-tooth comb, and they were discovering all sorts of stuff that we hadn't had before. And they put in requests for more evidence. We got more of the evidence that we didn't have in the first trial. We didn't have a full disclosure, which is actually illegal. You can't hold somebody criminally liable and take them to court unless you give them a full disclosure. Well, we got more of the evidence. We actually never did get the full bout of the evidence. So the whole thing was actually illegal from start to finish. And so we get in this disagreement with the lawyers because they don't want to touch on the corruption, because we've just discovered that the police were involved in botching the investigation. And that Alberta Health Services was involved in suppressing evidence and actually disappearing evidence, and that they only sent a small portion to the medical examiner that would paint one picture, whereas they'd already discovered he didn't have bacterial meningitis while in the hospital, right? They'd ruled that out, and any sign of infection just wasn't there. And so there goes that narrative. But yet here they're tampering with evidence and only supplying portions to the medical examiner's office. And then the medical examiner's office is in on it, where somebody from the Crown Prosecution Office, before the autopsy even took place, sends a letter to the medical examiner saying, basically, this is what he died from, which you can't do that. There's no autopsy yet. Why are you telling the medical examiner what he died from when you don't know what he died from? That's what and so it's influence peddling, right? So we see how all of them are involved, and the lawyers are not willing to go there. And so based on the fact that we can't afford you lawyers and you're not willing to go that route, sorry, we got to fire you. Because at that point in time, we had 2 lawyers, and my wife was livid. She was livid with me, right? And so anyways, I'm like, okay, well, I don't know, we got to go with it. And this is where it became a beautiful story of deliverance, because we were delivered. And I'll say it was directly connected, because we all know what's going on in our lives and whatnot. And when we stray, right, we just find ourselves even just in a lull where we're just not being diligent and faithful in the sense of proactively seeking him on a daily basis. How we have that distancing, right? How the spirit just, the light starts to kind of dim down. Somebody's slowly turned down that dimmer switch, right? Well, there was a direct connection to the level of connection that I had with the Most High through my faithfulness, through being faithful, seeking him on a daily basis, right? And the successes that we had in court. And when we strayed, things went awry. It was actually very similar, over an extended period of time. It would be a very similar story to that of Moses when the Amalekites came up against him and the arms up, And as soon as the
Yeah.
arms go down, they start to suffer, and Israel's losing, and the arms go back up. It is, but just obviously from a different level. Like, am I faithful? We're succeeding. Am I not faithful? We're not succeeding, right? And we had years of this for me to be able to analyze, and I laid that out in my I think it's the last post I put up, that there was a connection there, that through obedience, through shedding these old traditions, and beginning to adopt more of his ways and be faithful in that there was a connection to that, and our success in getting through I list it as an insurmountable enemy. I didn't have millions of dollars of taxpayers' money to allot to this. I was broke as a joke and representing myself at this point in time, with my brother and his team behind the scenes going through the files and prepping me on the files so that I knew what I was talking about. We get into court in 2019, and we exposed every one of those witnesses. Every one of those doctors basically walked away with their tail between their legs. I'm not kidding you. It was so vindicating to see my accusers who sat there and just lied in 2016 and got me put into jail, and my wife on house arrest and all this type of stuff, unjustly, to now have them exposed, where they're literally just walking away ashamed, knowing that they were lying, and that some hillbilly bearded dude, right? Like, I don't know how they peg me, right? Whatever. Anyways, I have the appearance of some hillbilly dude who lives out in the boonies in southern Alberta, lays them to waste, right? Exposes them, shows that, right? Like,
it reminds me of when you come before the courts or the kings or the judges, don't worry about what you're going to say, because that's, I don't know, that's pretty cool.
That's exactly it. Now, my brother was constantly preparing questions and where I needed to go and all this type of stuff, and I'd go to prep with him during court. After court, I'd go over there and I'd go to prep, and I tried to do this about 3 times to prep for the next day, because these are big things. Like, when a lawyer is done during a big trial, when they're done court, they go back to the hotel and they're prepping. They're going through the files for the witnesses the next day. You have to. I couldn't do it. Every time I'd go there, I'd burn out. I'd burn out rapidly. And after it happened about 3 times, we looked at it, and my brother just said, "I don't think you're supposed to do this." I said, "I don't think I am either."
Wow.
And so it literally became, I walked into court in the morning.
Oh
He
my
had
goodness.
files. We had a witness. We had a rough idea of how we were going to address this, and we just let the workings of the Spirit take place. And I'm telling you, victory was had. And it wasn't because of my intellect. It wasn't because of my brother's intellect. We were discovering stuff in court that we weren't aware of before. Even more corruption came out in relation to reports that they had. There was all sorts of stuff coming out where we found 4 different copies of one report. We're like, how is there 4 different copies? They all say slightly different things. I thought a copy's a copy. Like, shouldn't this be finalized? Were you guys still changing the narrative months after the fact? What were you guys doing here? Like, this is crazy, right? And so they're being exposed. We had no idea about this, but I'm telling you, his hand was upon this, and deliverance was provided through him. Not because, like I said, I mean, was I able to go up against him with medical terms and all that type of stuff? Sure. Okay. I'm not a slouch when it comes to the sciences.
No.
But in relation to the flow of everything and how it was exposed in ways that we had no idea about, I'm telling you, it was a miracle. It was absolutely amazing. So
that reminds me of the wisdom of the world is foolishness to the Father, right? To the Almighty, the one who has all the might. And I was kind of, there's another passage. I should go look back and look it up. I think it's in Proverbs. A lot of good stuff in there, but it basically, the wisdom of the world, paraphrasing, kind of leads to destruction. And it's just absolutely, because the wisdom of the world always takes the creator out of the equation. Like, look at our modern sciences, for starters, like the Big Bang Theory, how any phenomenon is basically, they can't explain it with their modicum or vehicle of science approach that they're using, and they can't allow another factor in there, such as intelligent design. We have maybe the Bible is correct. It's always like, let's try to prove the Bible wrong, always seems to be the narrative, and they always fail at that. Given enough time, I mean, a lot of people argue, oh, we've advanced, we have this, we have that, but like you said, like, now we have studies out for quite a long time that pork is actually bad for you. The Bible is correct. just for one thing. And I noticed, don't want to derail too much of the conversation, your map in the background, would you say that the Bible is correct in the biblical creation model in terms of,
Absolutely.
yes. Oh,
I love how you have
amen.
both there.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, obviously we bought the one below first
Yeah.
and started to educate the kids on that.
Yeah.
And then in 2016, I mean, that's a whole other story I'm telling, but I was given an epiphany after
I
about
want you on again.
150 hours of research approximately. Couldn't answer all the questions. I was trying to prove it wrong, trying to prove that the upper model
Mhm.
there
Yeah.
wrong. And I wasn't proving it wrong. And then I'm driving home one day, and I still haven't heard anybody talk about this online. I'm driving home one day. I'm looking at the mountains. I'm saying, wait a minute. They were measuring the height of the mountains with precision back in the 1800s. How are they doing that?
Mhm.
Like, huh? 'Cause at this point in time, I'm running the curvature equation all the time now, and I'm having fun with it because I just have a natural gravitation towards math. Did very well with it. Never did my homework. Was almost always the top of my class. It just clicks for me. Math does. So I'm loving this curvature equation now, but I'm still not willing to fully adopt it. I'm like, long held worldview. Anyway, so I'm driving home one day. I'm like, wait a minute. They were
love it.
they were measuring the height of mountains back in the
Mhm.
1800s with precision. So I look up Everest again, right? I'm like, how they measure it? They got it 99.9% correct. They literally got 29,000 feet for Everest. They added 2 more feet because they thought that all those numbers after zeros, nobody believed that they made it up 29,000. So they put 29,002 feet. Turns out it's debatable today that it's 29,029 feet up to 29,035 feet or whatever. Anyways, but they literally got it 99.9% correct. They were taking measurements from 150 miles away. That's over 15,000 feet of drop of curvature.
Yeah.
They didn't have the curvature to put into the simple what they call grade 9 trigonometry equation to get
Mhm.
the height of the mountain. You
Yeah.
can't do that. It's just it's an impossibility unless you knew the distance of the mountain first, and that the mountain was still visible behind the other mountains after that much curvature drop. Then they could add curvature in, which would be highly complicated because they have to know exactly how far the peak was from them. But the only way they can know how far the peak was is if they do the first triangulation, which can't have curvature as part of it. It's an impossibility unless somehow they got one more piece of information for the equation. But when you look at what they and they openly say it, how they did it, they used simple grade 9 trigonometry, which does not work on a curve. And yet they got it 99.9% correct, right? Using 2 different measurements, 107 miles, 150 miles, respectively, over 7,000 feet of drop, 15,000 feet of drop. So as soon as I'm driving home, I had that epiphany. I went and researched. I'm like, I'm done. I'm done. It's sold on me, right? Like it's just I'm looking at mountains that I shouldn't be able to see, right? Not with the curvature of Earth with 24,900 feet or 24,900 meters, miles. Sorry, circumference at the equator. It just doesn't work.
No.
So, anyways, we ought not to digress further, but yeah,
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail
I
too
do
much. I
believe
was
in the
just like, I
biblical
wonder if you believe
cosmology.
the first. I just wondered if you believe the first page of the Bible as much as the rest, which is I find interesting because the first page lays it out in like the first 10 verses, right? There's water, let there be light, or the first chapter anyway, and then an expanse. And then I actually looked in the back of my KJV Bible. I have a couple, and I was looking at biblical terms. It said firmament, solid dome structure, has like gates in it and doorways, and lists some scripture for it. I'm like, but the thing is, you have the doctrine of accommodation. Oh, they're stupid, and the Almighty was like, I can't explain it to them, so I'll let them believe a lie for, almost 4,500, 5,000 years, and then they'll get it, right? So I always found that was kind of a very interesting narrative. I was like, why can't we just, even as a child, I was like, the Bible says it. Why we believe Jesus died on a cross and came back to life? Why can't we believe the shape of the earth, or why can't we believe any of these other hard to swallow concepts that get metaphor? They're all metaphors. But you ask, what's the metaphor for? What is it? What is it? What is it the analogy to? And they're like, God's greatness. And it's like, well, usually metaphors there's a buildup in context to let you know it's a metaphor, such as Jesus as the lamb. Well, he's not actually a lamb, so that has to be a metaphor, right? So then you have Job 38. I mean, the earth takes shape like clay pressed under a seal. It's like, okay, well, that's obviously a metaphor, but if you press clay with a seal, it's kind of flat, right, with some raised areas, and it's usually the seal is round, right? He scribes a circle on the deep. He's looking over the circle of the earth. Like all these descriptions, is the earth set on pillars, does not move. The sun and the moon, they move, right? And just like, okay, I understood. I think around 2014, it was kind of like a lot of people kind of came to the truth in a lot of things, it seems like.
I first heard about it in 2016. I just thought the idea was so ridiculous. And so as soon as
Mhm.
I learned about the curvature, I'm like, oh, this will be simple. I can prove that wrong. People actually, somebody actually believes that there's flat earth. Like, this is strange. I didn't see it online. I literally had a friend bring it up with me, and I'm just like, dude, you crazy, right? Like, this is way off. Like, you serious? People believe this stuff? I was absolutely shocked. Now, you need to understand, I kind of live in a bubble. So my belief system right now isn't really influenced by others. This has been a journey of just feeling impressed to move forward. And then when I realized others were like kind of walking on that same walk, and that there's this thing called Hebrew roots and stuff, and I'm being thrown in with those guys, and whatever, I'm like, this is weird. I'm not as alone as I thought I was. I'm like,
Yeah.
huh. I'm like, well, at least I can have a testimony of this, that this is what I'm feeling driven to do on my own accord, not because I'm impressionable from watching some YouTube video, because I just don't have time to watch YouTube videos, right? So aside from those Christmas ones on that particular evening in 2014. So
Thankfully, yeah.
thankfully, yes. So, sometimes I guess when I feel impressed to watch a YouTube video, I'll watch it, but it's very rare. So I just ignore a lot of the YouTube or the Facebook messages I get where people are sending me videos. I'm like, I don't have time. I'd literally be watching them like almost 24 hours a day if I was to watch every video that got sent to me. So
You do get that if you once you start going down that path. I fortunately have a job where I can just do that, and I can work and make money and listen at the same time, and stop or listen to my Bible app or whatever. But yeah, there you can go on for a long time if
oh
there's a
yeah,
lot
no,
out there now.
I've got stuff to do, and I'd rather listen to some audiobooks of my choice that are gonna do, that I know what the supposed outcome is supposed to be. So now we're self-representing. We're found not guilty in 2019, and beautiful thing, right? Like, it's beautiful, absolute beautiful thing. I'm self-representing. Sorry, 3 lawyers did pitch in as their schedules dictated for my wife, because on like 3 days notice or whatever, it's like she needs a lawyer. She actually has to represent herself. I can't represent her. It's not allowed.
Oh, okay.
And there's particular elements where they're going straight at her, so I can't even help her in that. And
no
she's
way.
not in an emotional place to be able to do it. And I don't blame her, right? Like,
Yeah.
women are wired differently. And this is over the death of our son. Like, this is a sore spot, right?
Yeah.
And so, anyways, 3 different lawyers would hey, I got one day off, I'll go and sit in court. They would watch me cross-examine. They'd come in and clean up after me, type of thing. They basically get the education of what's going on, watching me first, and then they would come in. It was really quite fantastic how the process worked. And just 3 lawyers that were just beautiful. Like, they were part of the cause. The only reason that they were stepping in and doing so at an extremely low rate was because their hearts were in it. They knew that this was unjust, and that they just didn't want to see this type of thing take place. So we win September of 2019, and then the Crown appeals again, of course. So now we're into our second Alberta appeal, and this is where it gets dicey, and they resurrect the whole vaccine issue that we had laid to rest with our expert witnesses years before, and they bring that up out of the blue with no evidence to support. And perfect timing, because they come out with their decision in March of 2021. So we're talking, COVID vax has just been released, and they're coming out with a precedent saying that vaccines are, or that medical attention is, a necessary of life, and then they group the vaccines into it by even going as far as stating that Ezekiel would have almost certainly been alive today had he been vaccinated. They had no evidence to support that claim. It wasn't even argued during the appeal hearing. They just pulled it out of whoever was back feeding them information. And so what they did was actually really, once again, completely illegal, but it set a legal precedent that we then said, okay, we got to get this turned around, because this is going to be used as a baseball bat for other parents. In Canada, we have a legal precedent in the top court in Alberta from the Chief Justice, the top justice. So it comes with a lot of clout. The only thing that would be held in higher regard than that would be a Supreme Court decision. in Canada, right? So we've got a precedent that's going to stand across every court in Alberta, or sorry, in Canada. And so we're saying we got to get this undone. So we went and applied to the Supreme Court and to get that mess undone. And it took them a year and a half to finally come back and say, no, we're not accepting the case, which is unfortunate because they only accept 10% of the cases that come before them that they're applied for. But what was really amazing during this time, because the Alberta Appeal Court sent us back for a third trial, which is almost unprecedented in all of Canada. I believe there's one other situation that went to 3 trials criminally, right? So now there's a bunch of precedents that were set throughout this whole circus. Really, is what it was. And so what the appeal court did is they limited the evidence, saying that the cause of death is not relevant, which is really shocking because the cause of death is fully relevant. Because if our son died from bacterial meningitis, you can say as parents, you were ignoring these symptoms. As such, you're not a reasonably prudent parent, go to jail. If he wasn't suffering from bacterial meningitis and it was something else like an electrolyte imbalance that somehow spiked the potassium and caused him to go into respiratory arrest, that they then corrected later on, and he reanimates and starts even after all the oxygen deprivation and everything. If it was that would catch a parent off guard. There's nothing that they could be watching for the day or two previous saying, oh, he's getting worse progressively. Oh, boom, all of a sudden you're in cardiac arrest, right? Doesn't happen that way. And so it's absolutely relevant, but the Supreme Court or the appeal court said it's not relevant, which means we have to accept the evidence of this medical pathologist, this forensic pathologist. And what they did is that they dedicated actually quite a bit of their written decision to putting him up on a pedestal as to how esteemed this forensic pathologist was. Well, here's where it gets beautiful. And this is the power of deliverance. Like delivered from, because we're looking at this and we're saying it will be nothing short of a miracle to come out of this court case, because now our defense is cut off at the knees. Like we're done, right? Like how are we going to do this? We know how we did it in 2019, and that was by showing that he didn't die from bacterial meningitis. Now they're saying you basically have to accept that as a fact. So what happens behind the scenes is that forensic pathologist in 2018, when we started to go online and expose the corruption, conveniently a month later, he moves down to Indiana, takes a job in Indiana, but we didn't know he was under the supervision of another doctor because down in the States, he had failed his medical exams too many times that he actually had to be under a doctor's supervision. So here, the Alberta Appeal Court has put him up on a pedestal saying this prestigious doctor, and yet in the States, he's having to be under supervision of another doctor, right? Well, some things come out about his transcripts on how he got his medical license. And he ends up under a credential fraud investigation in both the state of Kansas and the state of Indiana at this time. And then he ends up, I can only imagine, because I know the guy's character fairly well after cross-examining him for 5 days in 2019, because he wouldn't give us a truthful answer, and he'd just keep on dancing around and I have to refocus him, and it was just a gong show. Anyways, he, a week after the credential fraud investigations were opened up on him, he goes and gets drunk at a pub and drives his Mercedes home drunk and rear ends a lady, injuring her, and ends up with a level 5 felony in the state of Indiana and ends up with his own criminal proceedings. One day after his criminal proceedings are scheduled, June 21st, 2021, sorry. The day after that was scheduled, the Crown phones us and says that we are staying the charges. And then they come out with a public statement saying it's been 9 years since Ezekiel passed and some of the evidence has deteriorated. A bunch of liars. No evidence deteriorated, right? Other than the evidence that you threw in the garbage because it was damning against you guys and you never provided it to us. A whole hour of crucial medical attention. That's the only evidence that clearly deteriorated, but that's of your own doing. Your expert witness who falsified the autopsy report, his credibility is deteriorated and he'll never be able to get himself onto a stand as an expert witness again after this. And
that's amazing.
Had nothing to do with us.
Yeah, that's
saving grace.
It's funny. Well, I can't remember what I was listening to. I was listening to scripture on my headphones today, and I think I was in, I want to say Ezekiel or somewhere in there. Fitting enough, that's the name of your son. So it's kind of funny that worked out. But there's one passage in there we have to wait for Yahweh. You have to wait. and do it in his time, right? And he knows best. And I've seen miracles always come at the last possible second. Otherwise, they're not that miraculous, right?
That's right.
Um, and I always find it there's always this weird convoluted thread that ties it all together. And when later looking back, you see it clearly, but while you're going through it, all you can see is your pain, your struggle, your misery, and you're like, like you're saying, your father crying out for years, not knowing, there has to be an answer, but he didn't quit, right?
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times we quit, right? And and it's when I first came into this faith walk, I remember struggling with a lot of things, and it's one of the few times I've heard an audible voice in my head, and I was like, I was just all welled up with emotions. I got to do this. I got to do that. This isn't working. I have come to this faith now. I have all these problems. I was just running around like chicken with the head cut off. And I just got this strong word like just abide. And I was just like, what? And I heard it again. So I had to like look it up and then look at all the scriptures with that. And it's not just like waiting, but it's like waiting and trusting. Like you're just like, I used to have this boss. He said, everyone has a seat assignment, and a lot of times you don't like the seat that's been assigned to you, but the only way to make it better is to do your best at that seat assignment and focus on it. And before long, you'll notice that you're actually enjoying yourself or getting blessed by it.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of funny, a little bit of worldly wisdom from one person, the biblical, and the voice in my head. And I kind of sat down, and that really settled me down for quite a bit, for quite a long time. And I've seen in my own life a number of, maybe nothing as big as and as intense and long drawn out as your story, but nonetheless, it was still at the time to me very, very impactful, and impactful to others. And that's the thing that always blows me away is doesn't matter how big or how crazy, like it's not like there's stories of people smuggling bibles into China and like there's a miracle and the guards let them go, and where someone's going to get killed and they get saved, or someone does die but something good comes a bit later. um what matters is that the person waited and trusted, right?
Mhm.
And worked at it. And um it requires a lot of work on our behalf as well. Like we can't just like, oh, I'm just going to trust God and do nothing, right? We got to be working through our problems, doing our part, right? And that's just, I'm just blown away by like your story. Like I haven't heard the whole thing, and so I'm kind of glad I waited to get it fresh from you, because that was like, man, I'm sitting here, I'm like, you're saying things that we keep getting derailed on these other topics that are good things to talk about, but I'm like, I really wanted to. My phone's almost dead. I was like, I really want to get to the conclusion of the story. I didn't want to have to drop out and listen to it later. But super, super, super blown away by how awesome that is. Um, I don't know if I could be strong enough to go through that. I mean, I don't have as many years as you under the belt of studying the Bible and being faithful. I just hope that one day, if I do find myself in that situation, I am as steadfast as you were. Like that's intense, man. Like I'm sweating a bit just thinking about like I went to court once in my life, or twice, and once for a traffic ticket when I was like 20, and the cop wasn't there. I got let off, and then so I was there for 10 minutes. They called me up, said, "Cop's not, police officer's not here. You're free to go." And I was skipping out of the court. I don't have to pay my fine. And then the second time was recently. I went for a friend as a character witness in a custody battle between him and his ex, right, for their son. So that was the only time I've been in court, and I remember like by the time I got in there, like I was soaked in sweat. Like it was intense. Like I don't dress up. I'm talking about a bushy haired, country bumpkin hillbilly. I don't even have a suit, which I call that a life or death suit. You wear it to a wedding or wear it to a funeral, and I don't really go to those. So I don't need a life or death suit. I just have new work clothes and old work clothes, right? So
Mhm.
I got on my nicest new work clothes, went to court, sat there all day long, went in and talked for 10 minutes, and that was it. But even that was like, I was like, I couldn't imagine going to court for like a custody battle, or even for even something that, even if I did something wrong and I actually had to go to court and I was wrong, but like to be falsely accused, that's just like, that's mind blowing to me. I don't think I could, I don't think I would hold up that well.
Mhm.
But I'm probably gonna have to bow out really quick. If you and Jonathan want to keep talking, I'll probably jump in the chat. And I really, 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 really am thankful you came on, David. That was gave me a lot to think about, a lot to research, and a lot to look into. Before I go, what scripture did you rely on the most? For me, going through hard times and things like that, I find that Psalms, things that your namesake David wrote, he went through a lot of these things, right? Encompassed about by enemies and trials, and Saul trying to kill him all the time. And I listened to actually Psalm 37 today, and it just and it kind of was like, oh, that's kind of because I researched a little bit about your story, but it seemed to fit really well with what you went through. And after listening to your story, I'm like, man, like I didn't imagine that your story was such a long time capsule of that intensity, right? Like I thought maybe a year or two, but that's, when you said like 9.5 years, that's a long time to wait to get closure, right? And
Oh yeah.
to be free from that, right? So talking about deliverance, like that's a lot, then you got to heal from that, right? So you have all the fallout, and yeah, so that's yeah, but Psalm 37 just kind of stuck out to me. And I find when I get stuck in prayer, if I just listen to the Psalms or read the Psalms, it's not long before I stumble upon one that just really clicks, right? So thought I'd share that with you. But
Yeah, Psalms never resonated with me until we started to go through the hardship, and it wasn't until 2015, all of a sudden Psalm 18 just slapped me in the face type of thing. And that became my theme going into the issues. And then in the midst of the issues, Psalm 27 was also another one that started to stand out because it's quite promising, right, in relation to the enemies and how it'll be turned on them. And it was. I found some of these Psalms to be prophetic, and I had a few people share Psalms in a sense of prophecy. And what's interesting is basically to a T, they came to pass, and it was a beautiful thing. Psalm 23, I never really... Mormons don't focus on Psalms, right? So, Psalms 23 is like the Psalm of Psalms for Christians, right? And Mormons don't focus on Psalms. So I didn't really know the Psalms, and nor did I put a whole lot of weight on them. I'd read them, right? Growing up, I read them. And so that was interesting. I'm more interested in the stories, right? But it's because I wasn't going through the situation. I couldn't relate to David. Whereas once I went through the heat of life, oh boy, I also was finding myself relating quite a bit. And Psalm 23 finally hit me one day. Got this, big library of Christian music. Just hit it, shuffle. And I'm at this retreat, this work retreat. And I'm in a hotel by myself. Like we're out in the boonies. I don't even have cell service, right? So I'm not obviously streaming. I still don't really stream much. I use what's downloaded on my phone. And I'm in the hotel room by myself at this particular mountain resort that we're having this work retreat at. And I head up the division. So I've got my assistants under me that are kind of working at whatever. And we hire this guy who's a pastor, but he's also a business consultant, a phenomenal one at that. And anyways, the one day he says to me, he takes me off to the side because he'd take each of us off to the side and meet with us, my team. And he takes me off to the side and says something like, I just feel impressed that the Lord's giving you a heart like David. I'm like, all right, okay, interesting, sure, whatever, right? Like, cool, thanks for that, right? So didn't put much weight on it, right? Like whatever that means, right? Anyways, the next morning, and I've got it marked in my Bible, January 18th, 2018. I better have that right. I might have that date wrong. It's 2018 is January. I think it's January 18th, 2018, marked on Psalm 23. That particular morning, my ritual is not ritual, but my routine is wake up, maybe do a quick little, couple push-ups, whatever, get the blood moving, drink my little thing of iodine, and go and get ready for the day, right? Jump in the shower. But I throw my phone on the back of the toilet in this hotel room bathroom to reverberate off the wall to give me some kind of half decent acoustics while I've got this Christian playlist on. And I have my shower or whatever, and I brush my teeth, and then I go to open the Bible. And I'm not reading from any particular part in the Bible this day. So it's just an open flip day. So what I do, I flip open, and it flips open, just grabbed it and flipped it, Psalm 23. All right, well, it doesn't click to me. Like, I'm like, oh, that's the one that all these Christians love, right? Whatever, right? It's like Psalm 23 it is. Sure. So I start reading. And I'm reading it. And I get to the last two verses. And I'm reading it slightly out loud, right? And I realize, because I left my music on in the bathroom. And and there's this song on. I didn't recognize the song because I'm reading. And also I realized I'm in sync with the song.
Wow.
It is on
Left and Right
shuffle. This is like
I'm gonna guess, was it Left and Right Ministries singing that song? Or they have a really good version of
no,
that.
I don't even know who that is. Who is it that was singing that? It might have even been Hillsong. Back then, I actually had Hillsong.
Oh, my phone.
It might have been
I'm gonna
Hillsong.
drop out, boys. My phone's about
Okay.
to expire. But shalom and blessings on you. You guys keep talking. I want to hear more when I charge it up, and we'll meet
Shalom,
up again
shalom.
next time, David.
Sounds
God
good,
bless.
Stephen. Blessings to you. So I find myself literally in sync with the lyrics of the song, and I didn't even like the song, right? I just hadn't taken it off my playlist yet, right? And I'm literally in sync with this song that's on shuffle. I flipped open the Bible. It was like a 1 in a billion type chance. I'm thinking, what's the message to this?
Yeah.
And it's about, you prepare me a table before mine enemies. You anoint my head, right? Surely thy goodness and mercy will follow thee all the days of life, right? Or follow me all the days of my life. And I'm like, wow, okay. Like, this is a message you want me to hear right now? Because I was in sync with the song. You know, the chorus was that. I was reading it at the exact same time. It didn't click until I realized, wait a minute, did I just say what the song said? Like, what is this, right? And then all of a sudden that song had some substance to it for me after. I'd never liked it up until that day. And then I realized, okay, this is a good song. I just, like better versions of it now versus that one. But anyways, so Psalm 23 became a bit of a theme as well. And in essence, kind of a prophecy, if you will, right? Like, because I think he did prepare me a table before my enemies.
Yes.
Right. That, regardless of what was going on. And now remember, this is 2018. We had just been done dirty by the Alberta appeals courts. We were hoping to get into the Supreme Court. They accepted it. We were hoping that they would be just, but we've just experienced injustice at the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench, the Alberta appeals court. We weren't holding our breath for justice out of this system. And so this was the middle of that. Like, it was only a month and a half before, 2 months before that the Alberta appeal court had just done us dirty, and we were going to be in the Supreme Court within 3 months from that date. And so we were still under a lot of pressure at that time. And my wife had just had, at that point in time, our fifth child, just back in November when the Alberta appeal court does dirty. So now we've got, these young kids.
Yeah.
And we're in this precarious situation. So, the heat is turned up even more. Like, there's more to lose at that point in time. So it was a really beautiful thing to have that experience, and then to reflect back on it and be like, wow, like he is so good, right? Sometimes he'll speak to us through impressions, sometimes an audible voice, sometimes it's through supernatural. Flip the scriptures open and find yourself in sync with the song that's on shuffle that you don't even like.
Yeah. As long as you don't do that every day and use it like a horoscope. But there are times where God had it happen to myself. When I was younger, flipped over and there it was. And it worked. Like, it was just, you can't explain it. It just happened, right? So, But I know people that look at the verse of the day and use it. Oh, that's my life. And, oh, how can I make it better? And no. But definitely, it's that's amazing. Yeah, it's funny because that is, probably the most memorized verse for kids in Sunday school is Psalm 23.
Yeah, and that just wasn't part of my life growing up. It just wasn't there, right? And so for all of a sudden it to take on meaning, when previous it had no meaning. In fact, I consulted with that day after some of our meetings. I said, hey, because a good Christian friend that was my assistant, I said, hey, look, Psalm 23 is that the one that you guys like use in your ministry? Like, that's your theme? He says, yeah. I said, really? I said, yeah, I gotta share this experience with you, right? So I shared it with him, and he's like, whoa, that's interesting. I'm like, it meant nothing to me before. It didn't even mean anything to me while I was reading it. I was just going through the motions. I just flipped it open and had no substance until I realized I was in sync during that particular part, and it just hit me. Wow. All right. Right. Like, I'm not a sign seeker. I just need to be straight there. I'm not a sign seeker. So for me to have that type of experience, because I'm not just grasping at straws and making stuff out of like, oh wow, I saw an eagle and this, like, I know people like that, right? And so for me, it was just like, okay, no, let's talk about statistics here. It's an impossibility that would have taken place, right?
Yeah.
I've got like 1,000 songs on my Christian playlist. It's on shuffle. and I just flipped the Bible open, and I literally fell in perfect sync. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So, anyways, it was weird, but
That's
really
awesome.
cool.
Awesome.
The feast days. I don't know
Yes.
how much? Yeah, this doesn't take long, this part, but I think it's important to encapsulate this, and it's kind of interesting how hindsight sometimes provides us 2020 vision, right?
Yeah.
So we still hadn't been keeping the feast days up until March of 2021, right? First Passover, which is cool, because the interesting thing is that was like, Israel's delivered. That was when the deliverance really started to take place. That's when things started to roll out, because it'd be only 3 months later, and all of a sudden, like, we're delivered. So that was actually the first time that we finally got past everything, all of the things that you build up in your mind as to how complicated it'll be and this and that, and I'm not going to do it right, and is it really that, like, what do you want me to do, type of thing, right? And it was a beautiful experience, but it just got more and more beautiful as time went on. But here's something that's interesting, right? And once again, I'm not a sign seeker, but when I see a pattern, I have to ask the question. I knew I was supposed to be keeping the feast, right? It was something that was put on my heart back, I was given some of the tools during, 2015, 2016, living right in the midst of the 12 tribes and going and visit that group from time to time. Unfortunately, always in court during, like, or something else is going on when they were having their feast. So I never got to observe them during their feasts, but I knew I was supposed to do it. So now I'm neglecting it. So 2020 rolls around, COVID's hitting, whatever, and we're ending up with issues with our company with supply chain. So I end up grabbing my excursion and hooking up to a trailer, and I'm going to drive out to Vancouver to quickly expedite the process of getting more stock on hand in our warehouse versus waiting for a delivery truck, right? And so I'm driving through the mountains, and my unit, it's can't remember the exact day, but anyways, it lights on fire. My excursion lights on fire. Okay. So, and what's interesting, it's right by Castlegar, which is just down the road from Nelson. So who do I phone? I phone the 12 tribes. They quickly rush out because it's Passover Eve. I'm about to chew into their Passover Eve, or Passover Eve. I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay. Thought nothing of it, right? Fast forward 1 year. I don't know about the Feast of First Fruits. We observe Passover, right? In March of 2021. But I don't know about the Feast of First Fruits. And so we load up a trailer and we start driving to BC to deliver this trailer to people on that Sunday, right? The day after the Sabbath. And this wind, it was windy. It wasn't too windy. We live in windy country. It wasn't too windy. We get 20 minutes from the house, and all of a sudden this gust of wind hits us and blows the whole unit over. And I'm the passenger. And we go into the ditch on one wheel and fly. By the time that we're in the ditch, we're now completely horizontal. And I'm the passenger, and it's flipping onto the passenger side. And I blow my arm right through the window. Fortunately, I have my seatbelt on. And I drag my arm in this rocky ditch because we're right near mountain, right? So it's starting to get, it's not so soft and grassy anymore. And it completely snaps my arm, like completely. Like, it breaks it in 3 places, but completely shears the humerus bone. And I'm thinking I'm holding my arm up when we come to a stop because I want to pull it off the ground. I look and it's not there. And I look sideways and I see it dangling with blood dripping down out of the long sleeve. I'm thinking I severed my arm because I'm sure I'm holding it up in this position, and it's down over there with a bend in the middle of my bicep, a 90-degree bend. And there's blood dripping down and I can't feel it clearly. So it must be severed and my long sleeve is holding it in place, right? Fortunately, it wasn't severed, but it was in complete shock. And anyway, so once again, happened on the Feast of First Fruits. Thinking, okay, whatever, right? Now, obviously, this isn't a bad omen that anybody who doesn't keep the feast, otherwise we have complete disaster everywhere if people don't.
Only you.
But then what happens, and these are like pretty big events that happen. Then, and this was a test of my faith, not too long after that, coming up December of that year, so we had just observed all of the fall feasts and all that. This company comes to finish a job on the property, and they come on Friday afternoon. And I should have told them, take a hike, right? Like, in a gentle, nice way, but take a hike. It's coming sundown. And I didn't do it. And they were doing a spray foam job on the bottom of this big, expensive 40-foot fifth wheel that we were having people come and live in on the property during that time, right? We basically a big hotel for people.
Mm-hmm.
And we were spray foaming it so it was winter livable. And they'd
Mm-hmm.
already spray foamed half of it. Well, they came and spray foamed the other half of it, and it ended up going a couple hours into the Sabbath. We're having Sabbath dinner in the home. Meanwhile, they're out on the property with their lights on and stuff like that, and they're doing this stuff on the property, which is in direct violation of the commandment, which I know better, right? And I think that's the point here. I know better, or I should know better, and so there's more expected of me than somebody who's living in ignorance to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's interesting is what was it? About 48 hours later, the unit lights on fire. And guess where it lights on fire?
Right,
Only
where
the
it's
part,
sprayed.
the second half that they had spray foamed, not the first half.
Yeah.
It hadn't cured right. Something took place. The formation of
up.
it and everything looked different. It had little like stalactites coming off versus a nice bubbly form. And I
Yeah,
started up the generator to top off the batteries because we were about to get cold weather, and it lit on fire and wrote the whole thing off.
Oh my goodness.
I'm just looking at this. I'm saying there's some, there's a bit of a message here that I'm there's more being expected of me because I know better. And to have 3 like astronomical events like that, like that are pretty big, and I can't say, well, yeah, I also had this trailer burned down. I had this. No, there's nothing else of large significance, but everything that seems to be happening now seems to be when I'm not walking in obedience and doing my due diligence.
Yes.
Something's opened up, right, in a sense. So it's kind of interesting. Like I said, not a science seeker, but when you got 3 of the major events, and they're all attached to 2 different feasts that I'm supposed to be observing, and the Sabbath, which I'm supposed to be guarding on my property within my gates.
Yes.
And that now I have that type of stuff happening. I have to look and say, maybe it's chance, maybe, but what are the chances?
Well, is it in Hebrew? There's no word in Hebrew for coincidence. So yeah, from what they believe is God has control over everything. So which that's what we believe. So there is no coincidence. It's a blessing or a curse. So if we don't do it, there's a reason. If we don't do his commandments, then it's a curse to us. It's just simple. It's so simple, and people want to make it about every other situation out there, but it's so simple. It's a blessing or a curse.
Yep.
Life or death.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. And yeah. And we're talking Deuteronomy 28 type stuff here, right? Like the blessings and the cursings. And I'm telling you, I've had my fair share of cursings, right?
Yes,
over
so
the last
have I.
2020. And it just seems interesting that the major ones are correlated with these times that I know better.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If I didn't know better, I don't think that this, right? Like it just wouldn't be happening type of thing. But the fact that I know better now, and especially like when they were working on the property, I knew that I should have told them to go, but I didn't. I was too weak. Didn't have enough backbone at that point in time to say, hey, look, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so I compromised. And what was interesting is the product was compromised clearly, visibly, and it was flammable, whereas the rest of it wasn't. And it lit up, and it lit up as if somebody had taken and doused it with gasoline. It literally lit up that fast. It just went woof. Yeah. And absolutely shocked me, because I was working my greenhouse about 100 feet away from it at the time that it first started. And by the time I got to it, it was engulfed in flames.
Was it closed cell spray foam or open?
I believe it's closed cell.
Yeah, because closed cell, if you don't have the mixture just right too, it can set off some nasty gases pretty dang quick too. So it would probably contribute to it too, and heat up really quick. I mean, I know I do construction or houses, so I know a bit about it. I know the guy that does one here in town. So,
and that clearly was the case, because that which they applied on the Sabbath, it was a clear cut line. What was done before, no burn. It didn't ignite. Everything that they did during the Sabbath, it ignited, lit up, and destroyed the trailer. Yep.
I would love to talk to you all night long. I truly would, because I got so many other things that I'm so happy that you came on. But you're more than welcome to come on, and I would love to get you on again, because it's just amazing. I'm just you've blessed me so much, so I'm really yeah, I really appreciated that you come on and that you're Canadian and all that too. It just joys my heart. It's just like, maybe one day I'll get to see you, give you a good neck hug, and I really want to pray blessings on you and your family. I know you've gone through so much, and I couldn't imagine half the stuff. And I've gone through a lot of stuff in my life too, and a lot of experiences. But when it comes to my children and to my wife, that's that's a big deal to me. But yet at the same time, I've had to say to my wife, "But the father first, always."
Mhm.
So I get that. Yeah. Anyways, thank you so much.
Well, I
And
sure appreciate you coming on.
any closing things, any the audience or anything? We're up to like I don't know, six or I think I saw up to 16 watching live there all at once. But yeah, it's been a pretty good stream in the chat here. So
Beautiful. Yeah, probably the overall theme. It's not easy to come out of the world. It's not easy to come out of Babylon. We're commanded to do so, but it's not easy. But to just be faithful, and sometimes, and it's meant to be this way. Sometimes it just feels like you're taking a step in the dark, and that's a
mhm,
step of faith to see: are we going to put Him before anything else? Are we going to make Him our first love? Right? Um, and just to do it, to just go with that conviction and to not deny it, and to end up in a state of self-rationalization and justification. We know what we're supposed to do, and if we delay, we find ourselves going into that
mhm,
justification as to why it's not that important actually or whatnot. So just to be people of conviction, to move forward tenaciously, and because I'm telling you, like, yeah, we've been through hell and high water. We sure
mhm,
have as a family. And I wouldn't, like, I mean, I said this in the docuseries, I wouldn't wish this upon my worst enemy. I wouldn't.
mhm,
The circumstances, but the
mhm,
experiences and the growth that we've gotten out of it, I
mhm,
wish everybody could have, because
mhm.
it has begun the process. And like I said, I'm a work in progress. I've got so far to go. Oh boy. But I'm telling you, he is making me into something far greater than I could have ever been without going through these experiences and without showing that trust and faith in him. It's been a very liberating experience. The concept of fear doesn't really have a hold or
Mhm.
play a role in my life anymore, because live, die, whatever. I mean, I'll take every day as I have it, and hopefully be in the mindset to consider it a blessing. But ultimately, it's all His. And um, after going through these experiences, we're just liberated from so many of those fears that we just know that He is there, and that He delivers us, especially when we're walking in obedience to His
Mm.
will. So that's
Yes.
probably the best closing remark I could give is that to trust, to have faith, and to move forward in a tenacious way.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's awesome. And shalom to all you guys that are watching and anybody else that watches after this goes done live. And pray that this blesses you guys and gets you strong and courageous. And thank you for everything. And you can stay backstage for a minute. I'll say goodbye in person here, and I'll just close it out in the live stream. Shalom, everybody. May y'all bless you.